Voiceover begins gently, setting a serene yet somber tone. In the late summer of a year not specified, our story unfolds in a peaceful village house positioned to overlook a river and plain, extending out towards distant mountains. The riverbed, scattered with sun-bleached pebbles and boulders, carries water that is both clear and swift, dancing through the channels with a distinct blueness. Voiceover transitions to a more dynamic pace as the scene changes. Through this tranquil vista, the narrative eye catches the movement of troops. They march steadily down the road adjacent to the house, kicking up clouds of dust that settle like a fine powder upon the leaves of trees. The dust doesn't spare the tree trunks either, and the leaves, which have started to fall prematurely, are stirred into a silent dance by the gentle breeze. The soldiers continue their march, and when they've passed, the road returns to a quiet state, marked only by the lingering leaves. Voiceover adopts a tone of contrast, highlighting the difference between the natural and the man-made. The plain, a tapestry of fertile crops and fruit-laden orchards, lies in stark contrast to the brown, barren mountains beyond it. Conflict rages in those mountains, and at night, the flash of artillery fire punctuates the darkness, reminiscent of summer lightning, yet without the oppressive heat or the tension of an impending storm. Voiceover lowers to a hushed, almost secretive pit. In the shroud of night, there's the sound of marching troops beneath the window, the rumble of guns on motor tractors. The roads are busy with nocturnal commotion, mules laden with ammunition boxes, gray motor trucks ferrying men, and other canvas-covered trucks moving with deliberate slowness amidst the traffic. Voiceover slowly builds a sense of anticipation. By day, the sight of heavy artillery being transported becomes common. Tractors haul long-barreled guns, now disguised with a camouflage of green branches and vines. To the north, the eye can wander across a valley to a forest of chestnut trees, with another mountain looming close by the river. There's conflict there too, but the efforts are fruitless. And as the rains of autumn arrive, the leaves surrender to the season, leaving the chestnut trees stark against the rain-darkened trunks. Voiceover takes on a softer, more reflective quality. The vineyards echo this barrenness, with their thin, bare branches. The entire country seems to mourn in wet and brown desolation as autumn claims it. Mists hover over the river, clouds cling to the mountains, and vehicles hurl mud onto the roads. Troops trudge by, their capes and rifles soaked, their leather cartridge boxes bulging under the weight of ammunition, giving them an oddly pregnant silhouette. Voiceover introduces a touch of fleeting energy. Occasionally, small gray motor cars zip by at high speeds, splattering even more mud than the trucks. They often carry officers, with one at the wheel and others seated behind. If among these officers there's one so small that only the cap and narrow back are visible, and if the car seems to dash with an exceptional haste, it's likely the king himself. From his residence in Udine, he ventures out almost daily to check on the war front, which, we are subtly informed, is faring quite poorly. Voiceover shifts to a somber concluding tone. As winter approaches, it brings a relentless rain that seems to set the stage for further hardships. With the rain comes a more sinister visitor, cholera. Though its initial onslaught is formidable, efforts to contain it eventually succeed. And the voiceover concludes with a sobering statistic. The army loses 7,000 souls to the disease. Voiceover ends with a quiet reflection on the chapter's themes. And thus, the opening chapter sets the stage, painting a vivid picture of a world at the intersection of natural beauty and the grim realities of war. A farewell to arms, to peace, and perhaps to much more. Chapter 2 of A Farewell to Arms begins with the narrator reflecting on the progress of the war over the past year. There have been many victories, and the narrative quickly moves through the capture of a mountain, victories on a plateau, and the crossing of a river in August. The narrator and his comrades have settled into a house in Gorizia, which is described as a pleasant town with a walled garden, a purple wisteria vine, and a fountain. The fighting has now shifted to mountains further away, and the narrator observes that the Austrians, who might wish to return to the town after the war, have not destroyed it with heavy bombardment. Life in Gorizia seems relatively normal amidst the war. There are hospitals, cafes, artillery in the streets, and even 2 brothels, one for troops and the other for officers. The town is full of life, with the presence of girls, the occasional sight of the king in his motor car, and the damaged infrastructure that reminds everyone of the ongoing conflict. The change in seasons is evident as the summer gives way to cooler nights and the autumnal setting contrasts with the previous year's countryside. The narrator then describes the transformation of the once green oak forest beyond the town. Now it is reduced to stumps and broken trunks, the ground torn up by the conflict. One day, as the narrator watches a cloud coming over the mountain, a sudden snowstorm hits, covering the guns, the bare ground, and the tree stumps, signaling an end to the fighting for the year. In the town, the narrator sits in the officer's brothel with a friend, drinking asti and watching the snowfall. They realize that the offensive is over for the year, as the mountains up the river have not been taken. This task is left for the next year. The narrator's friend spots the priest from their mess walking in the slush and invites him in, but the priest declines with a smile. That evening, during a meal in the mess, the captain teases the young priest, who is easily embarrassed and wears a uniform with a cross. The captain, speaking in pidgin Italian for the narrator's benefit, jokes about the priest being with girls, which the priest shyly denies. The officers laugh, enjoying the baiting. The conversation turns to religion, with the major declaring his atheism and disdain for the Pope's supposed support of Austria. The lieutenant mentions a controversial book that challenged his faith, which the priest criticizes as vile. The lieutenant promises to get a copy for the narrator, but the priest advises against reading it. The major insists that all intelligent men are atheists and expresses skepticism about the Freemasons, which the lieutenant defends. As someone enters the room, the conversation shifts to the narrator's potential leave. The major and lieutenant suggest various Italian destinations like Rome, Naples, Sicily, Amalfi, Palermo, and Capri. The priest, however, recommends visiting his family in Abruzzi, despite the others mocking the idea due to its snowy weather. The captain continues to joke, using hand gestures to imply that the narrator will return from leave, promoted from a second lieutenant to a lieutenant colonel. The laughter at the captain's humor contrasts with the priest's earnest invitation to Abruzzi for hunting and to meet his family. Finally, as the evening progresses, the captain suggests they visit the brothel before it closes. The narrator bids the priest good night, ending the chapter with a sense of camaraderie amid the absurdities and interruptions of war. Chapter 3 of A Farewell to Arms opens with the narrator, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, returning to the Italian front after a time away. It's now spring, and as he arrives in the town where he's stationed, he notes the changes that have come with the season. The countryside is lush with greenery, and there's a noticeable increase in military activity, with more guns and new hospitals. The presence of British men and women suggests a growing international effort in the war. Despite the signs of conflict, the freshness of spring is in the air, and Frederick finds comfort in the familiar. As Frederick walks through the town, he takes in the small but significant details that signal the passing of time and the escalation of the war. He sees more evidence of damage from shell fire, yet the town maintains a sense of continuity and resilience amid the chaos. Upon reaching his quarters, he debates whether to report to his superior, the major, immediately or freshen up first. Deciding on the latter, he heads upstairs to the room he shares with Lieutenant Rinaldi. The room is just as he left it, with personal and military items neatly in place, including his treasured Austrian sniper's rifle. Rinaldi, who is sleeping when Frederick enters, wakes and greets him enthusiastically. They exchange pleasantries and a kiss on the cheek, as is customary among friends in Italy. Rinaldi, ever curious, bombards Frederick with questions about his travels during his leave. Frederick briefly recounts his visits to various Italian cities, but Rinaldi is more interested in the romantic escapades Frederick might have had. Their conversation reveals that Rinaldi has fallen for a British nurse named Miss Barclay and is even considering marriage after the war. He plans to introduce Frederick to her later that afternoon. In the meantime, the war seems to be on a brief hiatus, with the hospital mostly treating non-battle-related conditions. Frederick cleans up, washing away the grime of travel, while Rinaldi, focused on making a good impression on Miss Barclay, asks Frederick for a loan. Their friendship is a mix of camaraderie and playful banter, revealing the close bond they share despite the grim realities of the war that surround them. That evening, at the officers' mess, the mood shifts as Frederick sits with the priest, who is clearly disappointed that Frederick did not visit him in the Abruzzi as promised. The priest had been looking forward to showing Frederick his hometown, and his family had made preparations for the visit. Frederick feels guilty and tries to explain how his plans were derailed. After drinking wine and spirits, he becomes philosophical, reflecting on the idea that people rarely do what they truly want to do. As the two converse, the other officers engage in a boisterous debate. The captain jokingly accuses the priest of wanting the Austrians to win the war and of being unhappy without the company of women. The priest denies this, asserting his support for the Italian cause. The major intervenes, defending the priest and acknowledging his good character, while the captain suggests that the priest's opinion on the war doesn't matter anyway. The chapter concludes with the officers leaving the mess, the argument unresolved, symbolizing the ongoing tensions and complexities of wartime relationships. Chapter 4 of A Farewell to Arms begins with the narrator, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, waking up to the sound of a nearby battery firing. He gets out of bed, goes to the window, and observes the morning dew on the grass and the paths of the garden. The firing of the battery outside is a slight annoyance, but also provides a sense of security due to its relatively small size. Frederick then gets dressed, has coffee in the kitchen, and heads out to the garage. In the garage, Frederick sees 10 gray ambulances lined up under a shed. He talks to one of the mechanics about the battery, learning that it is not targeted by enemy fire because it's protected by a hill. He inquires about the condition of the vehicles and is assured that everything is running smoothly, despite one ambulance needing new rings. Frederick conducts a routine inspection of the cars, checking for damage or issues, and finds them in good condition. This leads him to reflect on how his presence does not seem essential to the operation of the ambulance corps. After speaking with the sergeant mechanic about parts and gasoline storage, he heads back for another bowl of coffee, enjoying the pleasant spring morning and anticipating the heat of the day. Later that day, he visits posts in the mountains and returns to town in the late afternoon. Upon returning, Frederick learns that an offensive is imminent, and he is tasked with arranging the ambulance posts for the attack. The posts must be close to the river, yet remain covered, and it's suggested that the infantry will help select the locations. This gives Frederick a somewhat false sense of soldiering. After a day of dust and work, Frederick goes up to his room to wash. He finds his friend Rinaldi, a surgeon, studying an English grammar book. Rinaldi, looking sharp and polished, convinces Frederick to accompany him to visit Miss Barclay, a British nurse he is interested in. After a quick wash, they have a drink of grappa, and then set off for the British hospital, a villa built by Germans before the war. Miss Barclay and another nurse, Helen Ferguson, are in the garden when Frederick and Rinaldi arrive. Frederick and Miss Barclay engage in conversation, discussing his unusual involvement in the Italian army and the nature of love and loss. Miss Barclay, carrying a thin stick that belonged to a boy who was going to marry her but was killed in the war, reveals her past engagement and her regret for not marrying him before he was killed. Frederick and Miss Barclay discuss the war, with Miss Barclay expressing her belief that the front will crack under the pressure of continued conflict, while Frederick feels the Italian front will hold. They also touch on the picturesque nature of the Italian front compared to the horrors of the French front. The conversation turns to national pride as Rinaldi speaks with Miss Ferguson about her heritage. There is a playful exchange about national identities, with Miss Ferguson asserting her Scottish pride and distinguishing it from English pride. Finally, as the evening winds down, Frederick and Rinaldi say goodnight to the nurses and leave. On the walk home, Rinaldi remarks that Miss Barclay seems to prefer Frederick over him, but also notes that Miss Ferguson is nice. Frederick agrees, but admits he hadn't paid much attention to her, to which Rinaldi responds that he doesn't have a particular interest in her either. End of chapter 4. Welcome to your next chapter summary, perfect for an engaging audiobook experience. Today's chapter takes us into the world of Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms, Chapter 5. On a warm afternoon, our protagonist, an American serving in the Italian army, pays another visit to Miss Barkley. But she's on duty. There's a war on, after all. The head nurse remarks on his unique position, and they engage in a brief conversation about language and the conditions for visiting Miss Barkley, noting he shouldn't bring a lot of Italians with him. Short pause to indicate a scene change. With the visit postponed, he describes his day at the river to the bridgehead at Plava, a critical point for the upcoming offensive. The terrain is challenging, with one narrow road exposed to enemy fire, making troop movements and logistics a dangerous affair. The Italians have a foothold on the Austrian side of the river, but the Austrians hold a similar position downstream. He observes the quiet, hot, and dirty environment, mingling with soldiers and inspecting the preparations for battle. Short pause to indicate a scene change. A new road is being built to facilitate the offensive, with a clever system to manage traffic flow under the threat of constant shelling. He identifies a safe spot for the ambulances to wait for the wounded. While driving back, he encounters carabinieri and experiences the danger firsthand as shells explode nearby, a stark reminder of the war surrounding them. Short pause to indicate a scene change. Returning to the villa, he quickly dines and sets off to meet Miss Barkley. She's in the garden with Miss Ferguson, who soon leaves the two alone. The conversation turns to their roles in the war, with Miss Barkley revealing her status as a VAD and the constraints they face being close to the front. Short pause to indicate a scene change. The ambience grows more intimate as they discuss dropping the topic of war. He reaches for her hand, then her arm, but she rebuffs his advances with a slap that brings tears to his eyes. Despite the pain, a certain understanding and tension build between them. She apologizes, explaining her reaction to the cliched situation. After a heartfelt exchange, they share a kiss that starts gently but grows more passionate, culminating in Miss Barkley breaking down in tears, seeking reassurance about their future. They have a moment of connection, hinting at a strange life ahead, and part ways for the night. Back at his quarters, Rinaldi teases him about his progress with Miss Barkley, leading to a light-hearted banter where they stop short of insults. The day ends with Rinaldi calling him "little puppy" as our protagonist disrupts his reading by knocking over his candle and retires to bed. This chapter paints a vivid picture of the juxtaposition of war and personal relationships, setting the stage for what is to come. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll continue to unravel the complexities of love and conflict in A Farewell to Arms. End of the summary with a warm tone. Chapter 6 of A Farewell to Arms opens with Lieutenant Frederick Henry returning home after spending 2 days at the outposts. It is late, and he doesn't see Miss Catherine Barkley until the next evening. He waits for her in the hospital office, which is adorned with many marble busts on wooden pillars, giving him the impression of a cemetery. He muses about the busts, the villa's former owner, and how sculpture seems a dull business compared to bronzes. Henry, who is supposed to wear a steel helmet even in the town of Gorizia, comments on its impracticality, where life seems to continue as usual amidst the war. He mentions his English gas mask and the requirement for all, including doctors, to carry an automatic pistol. He carries an Astra 7.65 caliber pistol, which he describes as ineffective for actual shooting due to its sharp jump when fired. He practiced with it until he realized the absurdity of carrying it, and now he feels a sense of shame whenever he encounters English-speaking individuals. As Henry examines the frescoes in the hospital office, Miss Barkley approaches, and they greet each other. The orderly watches as they decide to head to the garden for its cooler atmosphere. Once outside, Catherine questions Henry about not sending her a note while he was away, to which he replies it wasn't practical. They express affection for each other, with Henry lying about having told Catherine he loved her, which he hadn't done until now. They walk under the trees, and Henry takes the opportunity to kiss Catherine. She acknowledges there's no private place for them to go, lamenting his absence. Henry assures her of his love and his return, despite knowing that he doesn't truly love her and views their romance as a game. They find a stone bench to sit on, and Catherine resists his attempts to be more physically affectionate. She expresses her awareness of the game they're playing and advises Henry not to pretend to love her, as she's no longer in need of that illusion. Catherine opens up about her moments of feeling a little gone off, and they share a moment of honesty. She acknowledges that Henry is a good boy and asks him to visit her without the pretense of love. They part ways for the night with a reluctant kiss, and Henry watches the warfare activity in the mountains and the ongoing festivities at Villa Rossa before going home. Rinaldi, Henry's roommate, arrives and playfully teases him about his relationship with Catherine, revealing that he himself was at Villa Rossa singing with others. The chapter concludes with Rinaldi expressing relief at not being involved with the British, contrasting his carefree attitude with Henry's more complicated emotional entanglements. Welcome to your audio summary of Chapter 7 from Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. Please relax and enjoy the retelling of this chapter as we follow our protagonist through a day in the war. The chapter begins with the protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, returning from a mountain post in his Fiat ambulance on a sweltering afternoon. He stops at the Smistamento, a sorting station for the wounded and sick, where he waits in the car while the driver handles the paperwork inside. Frederick observes a regiment of soldiers, the Brigata Basilicata, trudging by in the heat, some showing signs of exhaustion and suffering. After the regiment and its stragglers have gone, a soldier with a limp approaches and sits beside the road. Frederick steps out to offer assistance, learning that the soldier has a hernia and not a leg injury, as it first appeared. The man, despondent about the war, has been refused transport and medical attention because his lieutenant believes he purposefully worsened his condition to avoid frontline duties. Frederick examines the soldier's rupture and promises to help him get medical care, despite the soldier's fears of being sent back to the front after recovery. The driver returns with the assignments for the wounded, and Frederick decides to let the driver take the wheel so he can accompany the soldier. During their ride, the soldier identifies Frederick as a fellow American due to his accent, despite speaking Italian, and they share their mutual disdain for the war. Frederick devises a plan to assist the soldier from Pittsburgh. He will pretend to fall and injure his head by the roadside, and Frederick will later pick him up and have him taken to a hospital. After dropping off the wounded at their respective hospitals, Frederick returns to find the man from Pittsburgh being loaded into a horse ambulance, his head bloodied, having successfully executed their plan. Upon returning to his base at the villa, Frederick showers and contemplates the upcoming offensive and his detachment from the war. He reflects on the various figures in the conflict, from General Cadorna to the Duke of Aosta, and considers the allure of other places, free of war: Spain, the Black Forest, the Harz Mountains. He sends a couple of cursory postcards home and looks forward to seeing Catherine Barclay that evening. At dinner, Frederick interacts with the other officers and the priest, engaging in small talk and drinking more wine than he'd prefer. The conversation shifts to jokes and stories, some amusing, others at the expense of authority figures like priests or the king. The priest departs, and the storytelling continues, becoming increasingly boisterous as the wine flows. The chapter culminates with a drinking contest proposed by the major, pitting Frederick against an officer named Bassi. Frederick, realizing he has a rendezvous with Catherine, concedes the contest and departs, slightly inebriated. Rinaldi, a friend and fellow officer, accompanies Frederick partway and provides him with coffee beans to chew to sober up. When Frederick arrives at the British villa where Catherine is stationed, he is met by Miss Ferguson, who informs him that Catherine cannot see him that evening due to not feeling well. Disappointed, but hoping to see her the next day, Frederick leaves, feeling a deep sense of loneliness and emptiness, regretting that he nearly forgot their meeting and had taken their time together so lightly. And that concludes Chapter 7 of A Farewell to Arms. The chapter paints a poignant picture of the war's impact on soldiers and the personal struggles of the protagonist, highlighting his longing for normalcy and love amidst the chaos. Thank you for listening, and I hope this retelling has brought you closer to the heart of Frederick Henry's journey. Chapter 8 of A Farewell to Arms. begins with the protagonist and his fellow ambulance drivers learning about an attack planned to take place up the river that night. The protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, is tasked with leading a convoy of 4 ambulances to the site of the upcoming engagement. As the convoy sets out, they pass by the British hospital. Henry, feeling a pull towards the hospital, instructs his driver to stop. The other ambulances in the convoy also halt. He exits the vehicle and tells the driver to continue on, instructing them to wait for him at the junction of the road to Cormons if he hasn't caught up by then. Rushing up the hospital's driveway and into the reception hall, Henry inquires after Miss Barkley, who is currently on duty. An orderly is sent to find her, and she arrives shortly, explaining that the heat had affected her the day before, but she is now feeling well. Henry informs her he must leave for the operation above Plava, and she steps outside with him. Outside, they share a brief moment. Catherine Barkley unclasps a St. Anthony medallion from around her neck and hands it to Henry, stating that it might be useful even though she is not Catholic. She asks him to return the following night, and although they cannot kiss due to the public setting, they exchange a gesture of affection as Henry leaves. Back in the ambulance, the driver notices the St. Anthony medallion. They discuss the significance of wearing it for protection, and Henry decides to put the chain around his neck and tuck the medallion under his shirt, feeling its presence against his chest as they drive. However, he later notes that after he was wounded, he never found the medallion again, suggesting someone took it at one of the dressing stations. The scene shifts to the journey, with the convoy driving quickly over a bridge and catching up with the other 3 ambulances. Henry enjoys the view from the lead car as they traverse the landscape. The convoy passes through the foothills with the high snow-capped mountains visible to the north and a column of mules with their drivers sporting red fezes. As they continue, the road becomes more secluded, winding through chestnut woods and offering glimpses of the river with its clear, fast waters. They drive through the valley, passing farmhouses and pear trees, before ascending into the hills again. The road steepens, with the landscape opening up to reveal views of multiple mountain ranges, some belonging to the Austrian enemy. Eventually, the road levels out along a ridge, and Henry observes the natural beauty of the mountains, some appearing distant and ethereal. The convoy reaches a turnoff and descends through the trees, where they encounter troops, motor trucks, and mules with mountain guns. Henry catches sight of the river far below a railway bridge and the small town they are set to capture. As dusk approaches, the convoy finally joins the main road by the river, arriving at their destination and ready to play their part in the night's military operation. Chapter 9 of A Farewell to Arms immerses us into the wartime atmosphere with vivid descriptions and intense emotions. The chapter unfolds as follows. Our protagonist, an ambulance driver, describes a matting-covered road reminiscent of a circus entrance, crowded and preparing for an imminent attack. As they drive through, the setting sun casts shadows of Austrian observation balloons against the sky, and the anticipation of war looms heavy. Arriving at a brickyard repurposed as a medical station, the protagonist encounters 3 doctors he knows. The major in charge, a veteran with a distinguished record, discusses the imminent offensive and assures him that he would be recommended for decoration if things go well. In a dugout, the drivers await their fate, discussing the bleak prospects of the impending attack over cigarettes. The protagonist secures a promise from the major that the drivers will receive food before the bombardment. The drivers, mechanics by trade, express their disdain for the war, engaging in a heated dialogue about the futility and true cost of the conflict. Their discussion touches on the fatal consequences of refusing to fight, the heavy toll on soldiers' families, and the perverse incentives that fuel wars. As darkness envelops the scene, the protagonist shares food with the drivers, a simple meal of cold macaroni and cheese served amidst the austere conditions of their dugout. The camaraderie in this moment is a stark contrast to the horrors they anticipate. Suddenly, the serenity is shattered by an Austrian bombardment. The protagonist is wounded, and in a disorienting sequence, he experiences a surreal detachment from his body, followed by the painful realization of his injuries. He discovers that one of the drivers, Passini, has died, his his legs destroyed by the explosion. In the chaotic aftermath, the protagonist, now severely injured, is tended to by fellow ambulance drivers who hurriedly apply makeshift bandages. Amidst further shelling, they attempt to transport him to the dressing station, dropping him multiple times in their panic. At the dressing station, the wounded are everywhere, with the medical staff working frantically. The protagonist is briefly examined and bandaged, the severity of his injuries coming to light. A British ambulance driver, recognizing the protagonist as an American, offers to take over the care of the Italian vehicles and ensures he is evacuated. In a mix of pain and bureaucracy, the protagonist provides his personal details to a sergeant adjutant before being loaded into the English ambulance. As the ambulance drives through the treacherous night, the protagonist overhears that one of the wounded above him is bleeding out, and the grim reality sets in that the man has died. The chapter concludes with the protagonist left to endure the journey, the cold, and his own pain, as the ambulance continues its grim task in the darkness of war-torn Italy. Voiceover begins softly with a gentle In the heat of a languid afternoon, within the confines of a field hospital ward, our protagonist lies recovering from his wounds. Flies buzz and whirl, a nuisance only temporarily abated by the swishing of a makeshift fly brush, wielded by a drowsy orderly. The protagonist drifts into sleep, the flies descending once the swishing ceases, only to be disturbed by his own breath or the shelter of his hands. Voiceover transitions to a more upbeat, conversational tone. Upon waking, the protagonist is greeted with the itch of his healing legs, a discomfort quenched by the orderly's application of cool mineral water on the dressings. As the dampness spreads, bringing relief, the ward's inhabitants engage in quiet chatter, a reprieve from the morning's routine of being ferried to the dressing room so their beds may be made. Becomes more animated. Enter Rinaldi, a burst of energy and affection, kissing the protagonist and presenting him with a gift, a bottle of cognac, and news of an impending medal for his bravery. Rinaldi, ever the optimist, is convinced they can secure the silver rather than the bronze, despite the protagonist's insistence that no act of heroism occurred during his traumatic experience. Rinaldi's determination is undeterred, his belief in the system's ability to recognize valor steadfast. Voiceover takes on a chatty, gossipy demeanor. Their conversation meanders through updates on the war, a successful river crossing, a coup de main, before veering into the personal. Rinaldi promises to advocate for an English medal and inquires about the protagonist's pain, eager to share a drink and his own surgical triumphs. The orderly is dispatched for a corkscrew, and Rinaldi continues, a mix of pride and concern for his friend. Voiceover adopts a tone of warmth and camaraderie. The sharing of cognac leads to a softened Rinaldi, toasting to the protagonist's valorous wounds and pondering the mental toll of prolonged convalescence. Their banter reveals a deep bond, peppered with playful insults and a shared understanding of the absurdity and camaraderie of war. Rinaldi teases about the protagonist's relationships, his connection with the priest and the English nurse, Miss Barclay. Voiceover becomes teasing and lighthearted. The conversation shifts to Gorizia, the absence of new girls at the brothel, and Rinaldi's frustration with the situation. The banter continues, teasing about loneliness and the desire for fresh company. But it's clear Rinaldi's visit is more than just frivolity. It's a lifeline of normalcy amidst the chaos of war. Voiceover slows, taking on a reflective and sincere tone. As Rinaldi prepares to leave, their exchange turns to the subject of women and love. Rinaldi, candid and unfiltered, shares his views on intimacy with the protagonist, a moment of vulnerability disguised as bravado. Their conversation becomes a duel of words, jabs, and jests, but beneath the surface lies a mutual respect and understanding. Voiceover softens further, conveying a touch of sadness. With a promise to send Miss Barclay and a final affectionate farewell, Rinaldi exits, leaving behind the cognac and the warmth of his visit. In the stillness that follows, the protagonist is left to contemplate the bonds forged in the crucible of war, the friendships that sustain, and the peculiar tenderness that can only be shared between those who have faced death together. Voiceover ends gently, fading out with a sense of quiet contemplation. And so the chapter closes, not with the sound of battle, but with the quiet aftermath of affection and the enduring connection between two soldiers, war brothers, amidst the backdrop of a world torn asunder. Welcome to Chapter 11 of A Farewell to Arms. In this chapter, we follow a quiet, introspective visit between Lieutenant Henry and the priest, revealing the emotional landscape of wartime and the inner lives of those touched by its shadow. Scene 1, the hospital room. The chapter opens in the hospital room where Lieutenant Henry is recovering from his injuries. It's dusk, the time of day when the light fades and the coolness of the evening sets in. As he lies in bed, he observes the room around him, the other beds, the tree outside the window gently swaying in the breeze, and the flies dotting the ceiling and light bulbs. The orderly enters the room, accompanied by the small, brown-faced priest, who looks embarrassed and out of place. Scene 2, the priest's arrival. The priest greets Henry and sets down some packages he has brought. Henry notes the priest's tired appearance, which is unusual for him. The priest expresses his inability to stay long, yet there's no rush in the moment. They exchange pleasantries about the mess and the priest's role as a source of amusement for the other officers, a dynamic Henry is familiar with. Scene 3, gifts and verbal exchange. The priest presents Henry with gifts: mosquito netting, a bottle of vermouth, and English newspapers. As Henry examines them, they share a glass of vermouth, though the priest's initial disappointment with the broken cork is evident. Their toast to health feels tinged with the weight of their experiences. Scene 4, a moment of reflection. As the conversation unfolds, it becomes clear that the priest is grappling with a deep sense of fatigue, not from physical exertion, but from the emotional toll of the war. Despite Henry's attempts to lighten the mood, the priest can't shake his dispiritedness. They discuss the difference between those who make war and those who are caught in its wake, the officers and the men, their varying levels of detachment, and the elusive hope for change. Scene 5, the Abruzzi and love. The topic shifts to the priest's home in the Abruzzi, where his love for the place and his faith shine through his exhaustion. Henry prods the priest about his understanding of love, leading to a philosophical exchange about love of God, love of women, and the nature of passion. The priest, though weary, tries to impart a deeper sense of love and service, which Henry reflects on with a mix of understanding and skepticism. Scene 6, departure and nightfall. Finally, acknowledging that he has overstayed, the priest prepares to leave. Henry expresses his gratitude for the company and the gifts, and they share a warm farewell in the growing darkness of the room. The priest heads out, hopeful for a future in his beloved Abruzzi, and Henry is left alone with his thoughts and the enveloping night. As the chapter closes, Henry drifts off to sleep, the visit from the priest leaving a subtle imprint on his consciousness, a blend of camaraderie, contemplation, and the ever-present backdrop of the war that has brought them together in this quiet hospital room. Chapter 12 of A Farewell to Arms begins with a description of the hospital room where the protagonist, Frederick Henry, is recovering from his injuries. The room is long, with windows on one side and a series of beds facing them. A door at the end leads to the dressing room. If a patient is near death, a screen is put around their bed, but only the doctor's and nurse's feet are visible to the others. Whispering ensues, followed by the appearance of the priest and the eventual removal of the deceased, concealed under a blanket. The major in charge of the ward informs Frederick that he is to be transferred early the next morning to another hospital in Milan for better care. The weather is starting to heat up, so it's best for him to travel sooner. While being carried to the dressing room, Frederick can see new graves being dug in the garden, where a soldier crafts crosses and writes the names of the fallen. That evening, Rinaldi and the major from Frederick's unit visit him. They bring news that he will be sent to an American hospital in Milan, which will cater to American ambulance units and other Americans in Italy. The United States has declared war only on Germany, not Austria, but the Italians are hopeful that the U.S. will soon target Austria as well. The conversation turns to politics and the war, with Rinaldi and the major fantasizing about Italy reclaiming its former glory. They also discuss America's position on other countries in the conflict. The discussion becomes lighthearted and silly as they drink brandy and jest about countries like Turkey and Japan. Frederick participates in the banter, making jokes that are lost in translation. The mood shifts to excitement as they talk about the pleasures of Milan, the Scala, the bars, and the possibility of Frederick attending the opera. Frederick jokes about funding his lifestyle with sight drafts from his grandfather, which could land him in jail if unpaid. The conversation turns sentimental as Rinaldi expresses how much he will miss Frederick. They are interrupted by a nurse who asks them to be quiet. Rinaldi reveals that Catherine, the English nurse Frederick has been seeing, will also be in Milan. The men say their goodbyes, with Rinaldi kissing Frederick and the major patting his shoulder. Once alone, Frederick realizes he's quite drunk and falls asleep. The following morning, Frederick departs for Milan. The journey is difficult. The train is delayed outside Mestre, where curious children peek inside. Frederick bribes a boy to fetch grappa, the only available liquor, and he shares it with another patient, leading to both of them getting drunk and sleeping through much of the trip. They wake up ill and suffering from thirst. As the train stops in Verona, Frederick manages to get water from a soldier, who also offers him an orange. He sucks on the orange and watches the soldier pass by the train until it finally starts moving again, marking the end of the chapter and Frederick's departure from the front lines. Chapter 13 of A Farewell to Arms begins with the protagonist, Frederick Henry, arriving in Milan early in the morning. He is transported in an ambulance to the American hospital, but is unable to discern the parts of town they are passing through due to his position on a stretcher. When they reach the hospital, he observes a marketplace and a girl sweeping outside an open wine shop. The stretcher is too large for the hospital's elevator, prompting a discussion between the ambulance attendants about whether to carry Henry up the stairs or lift him off the stretcher to fit in the elevator. They opt for the latter, but the cramped space causes Henry intense pain as his legs bend. The atmosphere in the elevator is tense, with one of the attendants' garlic and wine-laden breath close to Henry's face. After a slow elevator ride, they reach the 4th floor and enter a hallway with several doors. When no one responds to the bell, the porter goes to summon help and returns with an elderly nurse. The nurse is confused and unsure where to place Henry since no patient was expected. Despite her hesitation, Henry insists on being taken to any available room. Eventually, led by the porter, they find a room with new furniture and Henry is laid on the bed. The nurse, Mrs. Walker, is flustered because she cannot access locked-up sheets to make the bed properly. Henry, in pain and frustrated, offers money to the porter to tip the stretcher bearers and himself, and asks the porter to hand his papers to the nurse. Once alone, Henry enjoys the comfort of the room and the firm mattress, trying to ignore his thirst as he drifts off to sleep. Upon waking, Henry finds the room bathed in sunlight. He is greeted by a young and pretty nurse named Miss Gage, who informs him that the doctor is away at Lake Como and that only she and Mrs. Walker are currently staffing the hospital. Miss Gage washes Henry carefully, avoiding his bandages, and they discuss his injuries and the treatment he needs. During the conversation, Henry inquires about another nurse, Miss Barkley, but she is not at the hospital. Miss Gage and Mrs. Walker make the bed with Henry in it, and he learns that the hospital is under the charge of Miss Van Campen and that more nurses are expected soon. After they leave, Henry requests the shutters be opened, revealing the view of the city's rooftops. He drinks water, eats lunch, and meets Miss Van Campen, the superintendent, with whom he has a contentious exchange about the availability of wine and the doctor's absence. Later, Miss Gage returns, questioning why Henry was rude to Miss Van Campen. Henry brushes off the concern and requests the porter to bring him wine and vermouth, which he hides under his bed. He spends the evening reading the newspapers, sipping Cinzano, and watching the sky darken and the searchlights move. Miss Gage brings him an eggnog with sherry, courtesy of Miss Van Campen, and Henry eats a little supper before falling asleep, waking once from a nightmare, and finally waking for good before dawn, only to fall asleep again once daylight arrives. Chapter 14 of A Farewell to Arms opens with the protagonist, Lieutenant Henry, waking to the bright sunlight pouring into his hospital room. As he stretches out, he initially believes he is back at the front, the ongoing war still vivid in his mind. However, a glance at his legs, still wrapped in dirty bandages, reminds him of his current reality in the hospital. Upon ringing for assistance, Miss Gage, one of the nurses, enters. The sunlight reveals her looking older and less pretty than before. She greets him with a "good morning" and inquires about his night. Henry expresses a desire for a barber, to which Miss Gage responds by revealing a nearly empty vermouth bottle she found in bed with him. She shows concern about his solitary drinking, but also jests that she would have joined him had he asked. Their conversation shifts as Miss Gage mentions the arrival of Henry's friend, Miss Barkley, to which she admits her personal dislike for her. Henry defends Miss Barkley, insisting she is nice, and the nurse proceeds to clean him up for breakfast. Once Miss Gage finishes, she leaves to summon the barber, who arrives shortly, a solemn man in his 50s. The barber shaves Henry in silence, and when Henry tries to engage him in conversation about news from the town, the barber cryptically alludes to the war and the presence of the enemy, refusing to divulge anything. Perplexed by the barber's behavior, Henry asks if he's all right, to which the barber responds with a declaration of his Italian patriotism and a refusal to communicate with the enemy. Henry opts not to pursue the conversation further, eager to finish the shave without incident. When the shave concludes, the barber refuses Henry's tip, reinforcing his Italian allegiance, and promptly exits, leaving the coins behind. Confused by the barber's odd behavior, Henry calls for the porter, who, struggling to contain his laughter, reveals that the barber mistook Henry for an Austrian officer. The porter finds humor in the misunderstanding, but Henry's response is bitter, not sharing in the amusement. Shortly after the porter leaves, Catherine Barkley, Henry's love interest, enters the room. She is described as fresh, young, and incredibly beautiful. Henry is instantly in love with her, and his feelings are intense. They share a passionate reunion, kissing and holding each other close, despite Catherine's concerns about Henry's health. Their affection is intense, but Catherine is cautious, reminding Henry that they must be careful, especially around others. They discuss the need for discretion, and Catherine confirms her love for him before saying she must leave. They share a final embrace, and after Catherine departs, Henry lays in bed, overwhelmed by his feelings but concerned about the complexities of their relationship. Miss Gage re-enters with news of the doctor's impending visit, having telephoned from Lake Como. He is expected to arrive that afternoon, bringing the chapter to a close with a mix of emotion and anticipation. The hospital room. The day is uneventful until the afternoon when a doctor, a slight, quiet man who seems unsettled by the war, attends to my wounds. He meticulously removes several small steel splinters from my thighs, displaying a refined distaste for the task. Using a local anesthetic called snow, he numbs the tissue, preventing pain until his instruments delve below the frozen area. Eventually, his delicate patience wanes, and he suggests an X-ray would be more effective than probing. Scene 2, the X-ray room. At the Ospedale Maggiore, a different doctor, excitable but cheerful, administers the X-ray. He arranges for me to see some of the larger fragments through the machine. Afterward, he has me jot down my details and a sentiment in his pocket notebook. He passionately condemns the Austrians and inquires how many I've killed. To please him, I lie and claim I've killed plenty. Nurse Miss Gage is present, and the doctor compares her beauty to that of Cleopatra. We return to the small hospital, and I'm back in bed awaiting the X-ray plates. Scene 3, the return to the hospital room. Catherine Barkley brings in the X-ray plates that afternoon, as promised by the doctor. She shows them to me, holding them up to the light, the right leg, then the left. Feeling weary of lying in bed, I send the porter to fetch newspapers. The consultation. 3 doctors enter my room before the porter returns. I've noticed that doctors who don't excel in their practice often seek affirmation in each other's company. They discuss my condition, examining my legs, which have improved since the field hospital, but still look battered and bruised. They manipulate my knee, causing pain, and discuss the need for time before an operation can be considered. 6 months, they say, so that the projectile can insist and the synovial fluid can rebuild. Scene 5. The disagreement. I express my disbelief and frustration at the suggested timeline. The first captain, sporting a beard, insists that it's the safest course. I sarcastically suggest amputating my leg to wear a hook, which confuses him. The house doctor reassures him I'm joking, citing my bravery and my medal of valor. After the doctors leave, I ask the house doctor to return. Scene 6. The plea for another opinion. I plead with the house doctor, unable to accept a 6-month wait. He explains the process again, but I'm adamant about finding another surgeon. He agrees to summon Dr. Valentini from the Ospedale Maggiore. Scene 7. 2 hours later, Dr. Valentini, a major, bursts into the room. He's exuberant, his mustache bristling with energy. He reviews my x-rays, flirts with Catherine, and jokes around, all while examining my legs. He's confident, assuring me he'll make me better than new. He dismisses the need for the 6-month wait and decides on surgery the following morning, leaving instructions for my preparation. Scene 8. The decision. Dr. Valentini agrees to a celebratory drink, promising to bring better cognac the next time. He confirms the operation for the morning, instructs Catherine on what to do, and leaves as spiritedly as he arrived. His parting wave, the star shining on his sleeve, leaves me with a sense of hope as he promises to see me early the next day. Chapter 16 of A Farewell to Arms opens in the quiet of the night as a bat enters the room where the narrator, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, and his love, Catherine Barclay, are lying together. The bat flits around the room, seemingly unbothered by the couple's presence, as they watch it from the bed. The tranquility of the moment is briefly interrupted by the beam of a searchlight scanning the sky before the darkness returns. A cool breeze wafts in, and they can hear the men operating the anti-aircraft gun nearby, preparing for the chill by donning their capes. Frederick worries about someone discovering them, but Catherine reassures him that everyone else is asleep. In the night, Frederick falls asleep but wakes to find Catherine gone. He hears her footsteps in the hallway before she returns to the bed, having been downstairs to check that everyone was still asleep. She even stood outside Miss Van Kampen's door, listening to her breathing. Catherine brings back crackers and vermouth, which they consume together, satisfying their hunger. Before drifting back to sleep, Catherine reminds Frederick that the snacks will have to be gotten out of him in the morning. Morning arrives, and with it, Catherine leaves and returns again, looking fresh and lovely. The sun rises as Frederick takes his temperature, and they enjoy the smell of dew and coffee from the adjacent roof. Catherine expresses a wish to go for a walk, but realizes the impracticality due to Frederick's injury. Their conversation shifts to Dr. Valentini, who is scheduled to operate on Frederick. Frederick finds the doctor impressive, but Catherine is less certain, though she acknowledges he might be very skilled. Frederick asks Catherine to return to bed, but she insists on completing her nursing duties, including updating his chart. They exchange affectionate banter about Frederick's consistently normal temperature, which Catherine finds endearing. They even playfully discuss their future children's potential temperatures. As Catherine prepares Frederick for his operation, she reveals her jealousy when others attend to him, even the nurses she works with. Frederick and Catherine continue their conversation about the hospital's status and the possibility of Catherine being transferred if more patients don't arrive. They hope for a quick recovery and dream of going away together, with a faint hope that the war might end. Catherine educates Frederick on how to avoid revealing private thoughts while under anesthesia, suggesting he think of anything but their relationship. The couple then takes a more intimate turn, discussing past loves and relationships. Catherine encourages Frederick to lie to her about his past experiences, preferring the comfort of knowing she is his only true love. As the sun shines over the rooftops, Frederick feels clean and ready for Dr. Valentini's arrival. The chapter concludes with Catherine committing herself to Frederick's desires, stating that there is no me anymore, only what he wants. She reassures him that she will be everything he desires, and they will not need anyone else. As Catherine agrees to come back to bed at Frederick's request, they reaffirm their devotion to each other, with Catherine promising to be good and do what Frederick wishes. The scene closes with a sense of their deep emotional connection and the sacrifices they are willing to make for one another. Welcome, listeners. to our voiceover of Chapter 17 from Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. Let's immerse ourselves in the experiences of our protagonist as he recovers from his injuries. Our scene opens with the protagonist, Lieutenant Henry, awakening post-operation. He describes the sensation not as death, but as a chemical choking that numbs the pain, leaving him to later vomit only bile without relief. The sight of sandbags at the end of his bed, placed to stabilize pipes emerging from his cast, greets his slowly focusing eyes. Miss Gage, a nurse, checks on him, and he tells her he feels better. She praises the work done on his knee and informs him that the surgery took 2.5 hours. Henry worries about having said anything embarrassing under anesthesia, but Miss Gage reassures him that he did not. Despite his discomfort, Henry is indifferent to the nurse on night duty as he drifts in and out of sickness, a state in which Catherine Barclay's presence or absence makes no difference. The hospital, previously solitary except for Henry, now houses 3 additional patients: a young Red Cross worker from Georgia and another boy from New York, both afflicted with malaria, and a third, a friend of theirs, who suffered injuries while attempting to dismantle an explosive shell for a keepsake. Catherine, admired by the staff for her willingness to work night shifts, has her hands full with the malaria patients, but still manages to spend time with Henry. Their love for each other is evident, and they communicate through notes during the day, delivered by a nurse named Ferguson, or Fergie. Fergie is a supportive figure, good to Catherine, and skeptical about the couple's future, warning Henry not to get Catherine pregnant and expressing doubt they will ever marry. Fergie is protective, cautioning Henry about the consequences of his relationship with Catherine. She expresses her care for Catherine by wishing the couple well, but also by urging Henry to convince Catherine to take a break from night duty due to her evident fatigue. Miss Van Campen, the head nurse, has taken issue with Henry's sleeping habits, and Fergie suggests it would be wise for Henry to help lessen Catherine's workload. Despite Fergie's skepticism, Henry insists he will talk to Catherine about it. Later, Miss Gage visits Henry, and he attempts to discuss Catherine's schedule with her. Miss Gage sees through his concern, recognizing it as a veiled attempt to spend more time with Catherine, but she doesn't judge him for it. They share a drink of vermouth, and Miss Gage reveals that Miss Van Campen has complained about Henry's privileged treatment. Despite Van Campen's disapproval, Miss Gage assures Henry of her friendship and care, offering to bring cold mineral water to soothe the itchiness beneath his cast. Miss Gage's tenderness is evident as she fixes the sandbags and reassures Henry of her support, hinting at a deeper understanding that might unfold in time. Catherine, after 3 nights away from night duty, returns to her shifts. The chapter concludes with a poignant note, suggesting that the time apart from Catherine feels like a long journey for Henry, making their reunion all the more significant. This chapter, listeners, takes us through a series of intimate hospital scenes where personal connections and the intricate dynamics of care, duty, and affection are woven together against the backdrop of war. Thank you for joining me today as we explored the tender complexities of love and friendship in A Farewell to Arms. Chapter 18 of A Farewell to Arms opens with a serene depiction of the summer that the protagonist, Lieutenant Henry, spends with Catherine Barclay. They enjoy simple pleasures, such as riding together in a carriage through the park. Henry recalls the horse's slow pace, the back of the driver with his shiny top hat, and the thrill of just the sides of their hands touching. As Henry's health improves and he's able to use crutches, their outings extend to dining at restaurants like Biffy's and the Gran Italia, where they favor outdoor tables under the Galleria's arches. They immerse themselves in the ambiance, candlelit tables, bustling waiters, and the evening's gentle descent, while trusting George, the head waiter, to select their meals. Experimenting with different wines, they often settle on dry white Capri, though George sometimes suggests others, like the strawberry-tasting Fresa, which disappoints with its lack of the promised flavor. The couple develops a routine. After dinner, they stroll through the Galleria, stopping to purchase tiny sandwiches to sate their late-night hunger. They then ride in an open carriage back to the hospital where Henry is staying. Upon arrival, The porter assists Henry with his crutches while Catherine disembarks on a different floor. Alone, Henry either rests in his room or waits on the balcony for Catherine to finish her nursing duties. When Catherine joins Henry, they savor their private moments together. Henry loves to take down Catherine's long, beautiful hair, comparing the sensation to being inside a tent or behind a waterfall. They indulge in quiet affection, touching each other's faces, reveling in the smoothness of their skin, and engaging in playful banter. Their emotional intimacy deepens as they experiment with telepathically communicating while in separate rooms, and they celebrate their own form of marriage, marking their commitment from the first day Catherine came to the hospital. Although Henry desires an official marriage, Catherine fears it would separate them due to military regulations. They instead find solace in their private understanding, with Catherine assuring Henry that she is wholly devoted to him. Conflict arises from Henry's unease about Catherine's past love and the possibility of her leaving him for someone else, but Catherine reassures him of her fidelity and the uniqueness of their love. She dismisses the need for traditional marriage, claiming her devotion is her true religion, and they are bonded in a way that transcends formalities. The chapter concludes with a tender moment as Catherine promises to return to Henry's bed after checking on the other patients. Their love story unfolds amidst the backdrop of war, a delicate dance between the joys of their private world and the looming return to the front lines that Henry must face. They choose to focus on their happiness, the bond they share, and the present moments they can steal away from the chaos of the world outside. Chapter 19 of A Farewell to Arms unfolds with the narrator, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, recounting the progression of the summer during his recovery in Milan. His legs, injured from the war, are healing well, and he is undergoing various treatments to regain full mobility. The treatments include bending exercises, exposure to violet rays, massages, and baths. His afternoons are routine. He usually stops by a cafe after therapy to enjoy a drink and catch up with the news through newspapers. Frederick is not particularly interested in exploring Milan, preferring to return to the hospital to be with Catherine Barclay, the nurse he loves. They are unable to spend afternoons together due to hospital regulations, which deem it unseemly for a nurse to be seen with a patient who appears not to need assistance. However, they occasionally dine out when accompanied by Miss Ferguson. Miss Van Campen, the head nurse, approves of Catherine's friendship with Frederick, as Catherine is hardworking and appears to come from a good family, which Miss Van Campen values highly. Frederick is aware of the ongoing war, noting advances on the Italian front but also the grim situation on the Western Front, suggesting the war may drag on. One afternoon, upon leaving the Anglo-American club, Frederick encounters Mr. and Mrs. Myers, an older couple returning from the races. Mrs. Myers is affectionate, considering the soldiers her boys, and promising to visit the hospital with treats. Frederick leaves, intent on buying chocolate for Catherine from the Cova, a local confectionery. At the Cova, he gets a martini and picks up the chocolate, but on his way to the hospital, he stops to have a drink with some acquaintances, including a vice-consul, two aspiring opera singers, and Ettore Moretti, an Italian-American soldier. The conversation turns to singing careers, military decorations, and wounds received in battle. Ettore boasts about his medals and wounds, showing off his scars and talking about his hopes for promotion. After the conversation with Ettore and the others, Frederick makes his way back to the hospital, reflecting on Ettore's legitimate heroism and how Catherine finds him unbearable. Back at the hospital, he and Catherine share a tender moment on the balcony before the rain drives them inside. They talk about whom Frederick met that day, including the Myers couple and their quirks. The chapter closes with Catherine expressing a mysterious fear of the rain, associating it with death. She becomes emotional, and Frederick comforts her, even as he tries to dismiss her fears as nonsense. Despite the reassurances, Catherine's fear is palpable, and the steady rain outside serves as a somber backdrop to their conversation about love and mortality. Chapter 20 of A Farewell to Arms begins on an afternoon when the group decides to attend the horse races. The narrator, along with Ferguson, Kroll Rogers, a young man with bandaged eyes from a shell explosion, and others prepare to leave after lunch. The men read about the horses and their past performances while the girls get dressed. Crowell is not particularly enthusiastic about the races, but keeps track of the horses as a pastime, and despite his injured vision, he receives racing tips from Old Myers, a character who dislikes sharing his information, but feels compelled to do so, especially with Crowell because of their shared eye issues. As the group of four travels to the San Siro racetrack in an open carriage, they take in the beautiful day and the lush scenery of parks, dusty roads, iron-fenced villas, and green farmlands set against the backdrop of northern mountains. Upon arrival, they are granted entry without cards due to their military uniforms, and they proceed to buy programs, cross the infield, and reach the paddock, where they mingle with the crowd and observe the horses being walked by grooms. One particular horse, a black gelding named Japalak, catches their attention due to its unusual purplish hue, which leads them to speculate that it might be dyed. Despite reservations about the horse's appearance, they decide to place a collective bet of 100 lire on Japalak, enticed by the high odds of 35 to 1. The race begins with an old-fashioned start involving a whip crack, and Japalak takes an early and substantial lead. By the end of the race, the horse is so far ahead that Catherine excitedly anticipates the substantial payout. However, Crowell expresses a concern that Japalak's potentially dyed color may not hold up until they collect their winnings. After the race, it becomes apparent that the betting has been manipulated, with Myers indicating that insiders placed heavy bets on Japalak at the last minute, driving down the payout. The group's dreams of winning 3,000 lire are dashed as they learn that Japalak will pay less than even money on their bet, leaving them with only a modest return of 1850 lire for each 10 lira bet. Disappointed by the crooked nature of the racing, Ferguson voices her disgust, while Catherine laments the loss of the anticipated windfall, despite acknowledging that they only bet on Japalak due to the suspicious circumstances. The group decides to have a whiskey and soda at the bar, where they encounter other acquaintances and the vice-consul, McAdams. As they socialize, Catherine and the narrator place another bet, this time following a tip from Mr. Myers without even knowing the name of the horse. Their faith is rewarded when the horse, number 5, wins, but the payout is disappointingly low. Feeling overwhelmed by the crowd and the presence of people like the Myers and the bankman with his family, Catherine expresses her preference for solitude with the narrator. They decide to back an unknown horse and enjoy the races away from the others, leaning against the fence and taking in the serene view of the mountains and Milan in the distance. They find a quiet spot near the Pagoda bar to sit and have a drink, relishing their time alone. As they watch the horses returning from the race, Catherine and the narrator share a tender moment, appreciating the serenity of the racecourse and each other's company. They agree to watch the steeplechase from the water jump, and Catherine thanks the narrator for being good to her. After some time alone, they feel ready to rejoin the group and end the day enjoying the races together. Scene 1. The end of summer. The chapter opens with the arrival of the first cool nights of September, signaling the end of summer. The vibrancy of the park trees shifts as leaves begin to change color. At the front, the Italian forces are struggling, failing to capture San Gabriele after a grueling fight on the Bansisa Plateau. With the departure of horse racing and friends, the mood is somber. Ettore returns to the front, Crowell departs for Rome, and riots break out in protest against the ongoing war. Scene 2. Conversations of War. The narrator, an American lieutenant, encounters a British major at the club who shares the grim statistics of Italian losses and reflects on the broader state of the war. The major speaks with a blend of world-weary pessimism and personal cheer, offering a bleak outlook on the conflict. He suggests that all sides are cooked, but the last to recognize their ruin will emerge victorious. They discuss military strategies and the possibility of future attacks, with the major cynically predicting that the Italians are in a dire situation. Scene 3. The Silhouette Artist. After leaving the club, the lieutenant stops at a barber shop for a shave and then encounters an old man creating silhouettes under an arcade. 2 giggling girls pose for their profiles to be snipped from black paper. Intrigued, The lieutenant agrees to have his own silhouette cut, choosing to keep his cap on for a more military look. The old man refuses payment for the artwork, suggesting the lieutenant give them to his girl as a token. Scene 4. Orders and Letters. Returning to the hospital, the lieutenant finds a batch of letters waiting for him. Among them is an official notice granting him 3 weeks of convalescent leave, starting October 4th. He ponders the date he must return to the front and the letters from family and friends, including one from Rinaldi requesting phonograph records. Dinner at a nearby restaurant provides a moment of solitude as he reads the newspaper and reflects on the mundanity of the news back home in America. Scene 5. Catherine's Revelation. Later, in his hospital room, the lieutenant is visited by Catherine Barkley. She is late due to her nursing duties, but they quickly delve into the topic of his leave. Catherine expresses a desire to accompany him, though the details are uncertain. Their conversation takes a turn when Catherine reveals she is pregnant. Despite the lieutenant's initial shock, Catherine reassures him, emphasizing her determination to manage the situation without causing him undue worry. They discuss the future, their fears, and the strength they find in each other. Scene 6. Brave Conversations. As they talk, Catherine and the lieutenant explore the concept of bravery, the nature of war, and their relationship. They share a moment of vulnerability, expressing their hopes and apprehensions. Catherine's pragmatism shines through as she discusses the practicalities of their situation, insisting they can overcome any obstacle together. The lieutenant, comforted by her resolve, indulges in a drink of cognac, finding solace in her presence. Scene 7. Looking to the future. The chapter closes with the pair contemplating life after the war, their impending parenthood, and the longevity of the conflict. Catherine playfully muses about their child's potential military career, while the lieutenant ponders where they will settle down when peace finally arrives. They share tender moments, their connection deepening amidst the uncertainty of their future. Note: the above script is a voiceover summary meant to capture the essence of the chapter in a narrative form. It is not a direct transcription of the book's text, but provides a natural-sounding overview of the scenes and events for an audiobook-style voiceover. Chapter 22 of A Farewell to Arms begins on a somber and dreary tone as the weather turns cold and rainy. Our protagonist, Lieutenant Henry, returns to his quarters, drenched from the downpour. He tries to warm himself with brandy, but it fails to lift his spirits. In fact, the liquor doesn't agree with him, and by the next morning, he's feeling quite unwell. The house surgeon, accompanied by Miss Gage, diagnoses him with jaundice after examining the yellowing whites of his eyes. This illness derails his plans to spend a convalescent leave with his love, Catherine Barkley, in the scenic town of Palanza on Lago Maggiore. The narrative then takes a turn as Miss Van Campen, the superintendent of nurses, confronts Henry about his illness. She enters his room unexpectedly and discovers a collection of empty alcohol bottles in his armoire. The porter had taken away some bottles earlier, but several remained, including a bear-shaped bottle that once contained Kümmel, which particularly irritates Miss Van Campen. She accuses Henry of hoarding the empty bottles, and after he admits to both buying the alcohol and consuming it, she insinuates that he's been drinking to avoid returning to the front lines. Miss Van Campen's disdain for Henry is palpable as she suggests that his jaundice is self-inflicted due to excessive drinking. She believes that such behavior does not warrant a convalescent leave. Henry, in turn, challenges her understanding of his condition by asking if she's ever experienced jaundice or known anyone who's intentionally tried to harm themselves to avoid military duty. The conversation escalates to a point where Henry sarcastically compares jaundice's discomfort to being kicked in the scrotum, a sensation he assumes Miss Van Campen has never felt. This remark pushes her to leave the room in a huff. Shortly after, Miss Gage visits Henry and warns him that Miss Van Campen is now intent on taking his scalp, metaphorically speaking. She's concerned that Henry's flippant behavior could result in serious repercussions, such as a court-martial. Despite Miss Gage's reassurances that she and others would vouch for Henry's sobriety, the presence of the bottles in his room poses a significant problem. Taking action, Miss Gage gathers the empty bottles into a rucksack, intending to dispose of them discreetly. However, before she can leave with the evidence, Miss Van Campen reappears, this time with a porter in tow. She seizes the rucksack with the intent to present it to the doctor as part of her report against Henry. The chapter concludes with a sense of looming trouble for Henry. The discovery of the bottles and Miss Van Campen's determination to punish him jeopardize not only his much-needed leave, but also his military standing. Yet, despite the dire circumstances, no immediate consequences are revealed, except for the loss of his leave. In this voiceover, we've walked through a chapter filled with tension, confrontation, and the threat of disciplinary action. It's a moment in the story that highlights the protagonist's vulnerability to both the perils of war and the strictures of military authority. Chapter 23 of A Farewell to Arms opens with the protagonist preparing to leave Milan and return to the front line. The evening train he plans to catch arrives in the station at around 10:30, but one must be present when it comes in to secure a seat. The protagonist sends the porter, along with a friend who is a machine gunner on leave, to hold a seat for him and to take his baggage, which consists of a large rucksack and 2 musettes. After saying goodbye at the hospital around 5 o'clock, the protagonist visits the porter's lodge to confirm his travel plans for midnight. The porter's wife, who has been providing tailoring services to him, is emotional and cries upon his departure. Although he tries to comfort her, she remains upset. Later, while waiting at a wine shop, he spots Catherine outside and they reunite with a smile. Together, they stroll through the cool, misty evening, passing by the cathedral in the square. They share a moment of reflection on another couple they see, one tightly embracing the other, hiding under a cape. Catherine somberly states that no one is like them, expressing a sense of isolation. As they continue their walk, they cross a foggy square and peer into shop windows, including one displaying outdoor gear. They briefly dream of skiing together in the future. They then wander through a narrow street filled with shops and people, where the protagonist stops to purchase a pistol from an armorer's shop. He checks the fit for his holster, loads it with ammunition, and buys additional clips and bullets, declining the offer of a sword or a whistle from the shopkeeper. The couple resumes their walk, and Catherine expresses feeling better than when they started, highlighting their emotional connection. They kiss in the street, shielded by the protagonist's cape, and decide to find a private place together. They hail a cab and head to a hotel across from the station, where they intend to spend some time before the protagonist's train departure. On the way, they make a stop for Catherine to buy a nightgown, embracing a spontaneous and carefree attitude despite the rain. At the hotel, after dealing with the formalities and settling into their red plush and mirrored room, they confront a moment of emotional vulnerability. Catherine feels like a whore, a sentiment that troubles her, but they quickly reconcile, affirming their love and commitment to each other. The couple enjoys a lavish meal in their room, consisting of woodcock, soufflé potatoes, purée de marron, salad, and zabayone for dessert, with wine to complement the food. The plush surroundings and the mirrors contribute to an atmosphere of indulgence and intimacy. As they dine, they discuss their relationship and the simplicity of their love, joking about the sinfulness of their surroundings and the pleasure they take in each other's company. Catherine reveals her detachment from everything except her relationship with the protagonist, and they express their happiness in being married to each other. The rain continues outside as they hear the sounds of the city below. They discuss the future, particularly the birth of their child, and make plans for correspondence during the protagonist's absence. As time passes and the protagonist must leave for his train, they reluctantly prepare to depart from their temporary home. Catherine expresses a wish for a permanent home, and they fantasize about the protagonist returning home with only a minor injury. Finally, they leave the hotel room, acknowledging the transient nature of their current lifestyle and looking forward to a time when they can settle down together. The chapter closes with Catherine insisting that the protagonist leave the room first, highlighting her emotional strength and resilience in the face of their separation. Chapter 24 of A Farewell to Arms opens with our protagonist and his companion, Catherine, making their descent via the staircase, bypassing the elevator. As they walk, we learn that the carpet underfoot is worn from use. The narrator, having already settled the dinner bill earlier, accompanies the waiter to a side room to pay for the hotel room. It seems the manager, who had at one point refused advance payment due to friendship, has left instructions to ensure payment is collected upon departure. The waiter is then tasked with securing a carriage for the pair, taking Catherine's package and stepping out into the rain with an umbrella. From the window of the side room, the couple watches him cross the street. Catherine admits to feeling sleepy, while the narrator feels hollow and hungry, mentioning food in his musette bag. A carriage soon pulls up, the horse's head drooping in the rainfall. The waiter, umbrella in hand, escorts them to the carriage and places Catherine's package on the seat. After the narrator tips the waiter, they hear his farewell wishes as the carriage sets off. They drive through the rain-soaked streets, passing two carabinieri sheltering under a light before arriving at the train station. At the station, a porter offers his services, but the narrator declines, returning his attention to Catherine. They share a brief and somber goodbye, as Catherine cannot accompany him inside. He instructs the driver with an address and steps out into the rain, watching the carriage drive away with Catherine inside, who leans out one last time to smile and wave. Inside the station, the narrator is pursued by a porter seeking to assist with luggage, but he follows the porter to the train where his gear awaits. The crowded train presents a hostile atmosphere, with passengers eyeing the newcomer warily. The narrator's reserved seat is contested by a tall captain with a vivid facial scar, who argues that saving a seat with a soldier is not permissible. Despite the captain's protest and the narrator's initial reluctance to yield, he eventually offers the captain the seat, acknowledging the latter's right to it. Resigning himself to the situation, the narrator tips the porter and the machine gunner who had reserved his seat, accepting the likelihood that he will not find a seat on the packed train. After bidding them farewell, he finds himself standing in the corridor amidst many others as the train departs. As the rain continues, the windows soon fog, obscuring the view outside. The night progresses with the narrator attempting to find rest on the corridor floor, taking precautions to secure his valuables against potential theft. Despite the interruptions at Brescia and Verona, where more passengers board, he manages to sleep, using his belongings as a makeshift pillow. The chapter concludes with a depiction of the crowded conditions: men sleeping on the floor, others standing and leaning wherever they can find space in the cramped train. Chapter 25 of Farewell to Arms opens with the narrator, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, returning to the Italian front after his convalescence. The landscape is described as bleak and muddy, with bare trees and wet leaves, setting a somber tone for the chapter. Henry rides to Gorizia on a military truck, observing the damage to the town, including many houses hit by artillery. He arrives at the villa that serves as the officers' quarters and is greeted by the major, who appears worn and older. The major informs Henry that the fighting has largely ceased, and they discuss Henry's war decorations briefly before turning to his new assignment. The major assigns Henry to take charge of 4 ambulances operating on the Bainsizza Plateau, a scene of recent heavy fighting. The conversation then shifts to the possibility of an Austrian attack, but the major doubts it will come due to the onset of rain and snow. They touch on the subject of additional American troops, with the major expressing little hope of seeing them on the Italian front. Henry then goes upstairs to the room he shares with his friend, Dr. Rinaldi. While waiting for Rinaldi, Henry reflects on his love for Catherine Barclay, resolving to only think of her at night, but finding himself unable to keep this promise. When Rinaldi arrives, they share a warm reunion. Rinaldi examines Henry's injured knee and suggests that more treatment would be beneficial. The friends discuss their experiences, with Rinaldi lamenting the toll the war has taken on him. He's been operating non-stop, and now without work to distract him, he feels the full weight of his depression. They drink cognac, and Rinaldi jokes about Henry's relationship with Catherine, but Henry asks him to stop, and Rinaldi respects his wish. The chapter continues with the two joining the major for dinner. Rinaldi is slightly drunk and teases a priest who joins them, but the priest remains unaffected by the banter. Rinaldi's mood darkens as he reflects on the war, and he confesses to feeling overwhelmed. He eventually excuses himself, leaving Henry and the priest to converse. The chapter concludes with the major reiterating that Rinaldi is exhausted and possibly ill. He also mentions the possibility of an Austrian offensive. Henry and the major say goodnight, with the major instructing Henry on his early departure the next morning and the importance of regular communication. This chapter portrays the weariness of those on the front lines and the longing for normalcy amidst the chaos of war. The camaraderie between soldiers and their coping mechanisms, such as humor and drink, highlight the human aspect of their struggles. The chapter opens on a quiet, misty evening. The rain has stopped, leaving a serene atmosphere in its wake. Our narrator, Lieutenant Henry, is with a priest who has paid him a visit. The two are standing at the door, contemplating the weather outside, upstairs in the room. Henry invites the priest to come upstairs to his room, where they can talk more privately. In the dimly lit room, Henry lies down on his friend Rinaldi's bed, while the priest takes a seat on a cot prepared by an orderly. The setting is intimate, quiet, and conducive to a personal conversation. Scene 3. A personal conversation. The priest inquires about Henry's well-being, sensing there is more beneath the surface. Henry admits to feeling tired, a sentiment echoed by the priest, who feels tired without any particular cause. The conversation then drifts to the topic of war, with the priest expressing a hopeful intuition that the end of the conflict might be near. He notes a change in attitude among the officers, a newfound realization of the war's toll. Scene 4. The nature of victory and defeat. As they delve deeper into their discussion, Henry and the priest contemplate the possible outcomes of the war. Henry is skeptical about both sides ceasing to fight simultaneously, while the priest remains hopeful, citing the changes he has observed in men's attitudes. The question of who really won the summer's battles arises, with Henry asserting that the Austrians, having held their ground, would not stop fighting. The conversation takes a philosophical turn as they reflect on the concepts of victory, defeat, and what it means to be Christian in times of adversity. Scene 5. The wisdom of the beaten. Henry expresses a cynical view, suggesting that gentleness comes with being beaten, drawing a parallel between their current situation and the hypothetical scenario of Jesus being rescued from the Garden of Gethsemane. The priest is visibly disheartened by Henry's lack of faith in a positive outcome. Henry expands on his thoughts, remarking on the inherent wisdom of peasants, born from a perpetual state of defeat. Scene 6. The search for belief. As their conversation winds down, the priest expresses his disappointment in the lack of a hopeful resolution, while Henry, feeling the weight of their talk, confesses that he only believes in sleep as an escape of mutual understanding, acknowledging the pleasure of each other's company despite the somber topics they've discussed. In the darkness of the room, they stand and shake hands. The priest informs Henry of his new sleeping quarters, and Henry mentions his early departure the next day. They make plans to take a walk and talk together upon Henry's return. As the priest leaves, he offers a comforting touch and a bittersweet acknowledgement of Henry's presence. They exchange goodnights in Italian, with Henry feeling an overwhelming sense of sleepiness as the priest departs. Chapter 27 starts with the narrator, Frederick Henry, waking up to find his roommate, Rinaldi, coming in late at night. However, Rinaldi does not engage in conversation, and Henry falls back asleep. In the early hours of the morning, before dawn, Henry leaves without waking Rinaldi. As he travels, Henry observes the Baincisa area, noting the steep new road, many trucks, and the woods and hills shrouded in mist. He describes the woods that were taken quickly without being destroyed, and the matting that screens the roads to protect from enemy view and shelling. When he reaches a wrecked village, he finds orderly chaos, with signboards directing amidst the destruction. He meets Gino, who offers him coffee and introduces him to various people as they discuss the British working further down the Baincisa and the current situation with a low chance of either side attacking due to weather and lack of fresh troops. Gino expresses his fear of naval guns and their devastating shrapnel. Henry and Gino talk about the tactical disadvantages of fighting in the mountains, with Henry arguing against the effectiveness of holding a mountainous front. They discuss the sacredness of the land and the shortages of food, with Gino noting that the frontline troops are well fed, but support troops are not. Henry reflects on his discomfort with words like sacred and glory, finding them meaningless compared to the concrete details of war. He understands Gino's patriotism, but does not share his faith in the meaningfulness of their efforts. The weather worsens with a storm bringing rain and later snow. A nighttime attack by the Croatians is repelled, and amidst the rain and machine gun fire, Henry and the others tend to the wounded. Henry witnesses the snow turning back to rain and an unsuccessful attack at daylight. Rumors of Germans breaking through their lines concern the soldiers, with conflicting orders on whether to retreat or hold their position. Eventually, the retreat begins, and they pass other military elements moving away from the front line. Henry helps evacuate hospitals and clearing stations, moving the wounded to safety as the army retreats under the October rain. Back in Gorizia, the town is nearly deserted. Henry sees a group of prostitutes from a soldier's whorehouse being loaded into a truck, and the scene is melancholic, with some crying and others showing bravado. Henry receives orders to collect hospital materials from their villa and proceed to Pordenone. The drivers, including Aimo, Piani, and Bonello, prepare the cars for departure. They decide to get some sleep before leaving. Aimo cooks pasta for them to eat when they wake up. After a rest, they eat together, discussing the retreat and drinking wine, with varying degrees of optimism and cynicism about their situation. Henry packs his belongings and, along with the other drivers, loads the cars with equipment. They discuss their sleeping arrangements and the likelihood of encountering Germans. Despite the heavy rain, they ready themselves to leave, taking a moment to reminisce about the villa before setting off on their uncertain journey. The chapter concludes with the group leaving the villa, Henry deciding to ride with Piani to ensure he stays awake during the drive, and they set off in the rain, leaving behind the villa and the life they knew there. In the opening scene of chapter 28, we find ourselves amidst a slow-moving column of soldiers, trucks, carts, and guns. It is dark, rainy, and the procession is making its way through an empty town. The protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, is in a car that's inching along behind a canvas-covered truck. The movement is frustratingly stop and go, prompting Henry to investigate the cause. He discovers that the congestion extends farther than he can see, so he returns to sleep in the car alongside his driver, Piani. Hours later, they resume their sluggish journey, which is further delayed in the night. Deciding to check on the rest of his ambulance drivers, Henry encounters Bonello, who has given a ride to two left-behind engineers. They question Henry's nationality, but the conversation remains light. Next, Henry meets Aimo, who has picked up two frightened young sisters, mistakenly believing they would be more approachable. The interaction is awkward, with Aimo trying to reassure them of their safety, despite their clear discomfort and eventual tears. Henry returns to Piani's car, reflecting on the chaos of the retreat, the uselessness of the mixed vehicles, and the vulnerability of the two sisters in such a harrowing situation. He muses over his longing for Catherine, his love, speaking to her in his imagination, before realizing he has been talking out loud in his sleep. As the rain lightens, Henry understands they must find an alternate route to avoid being sitting ducks if enemy aircraft attack. He scouts for a side road and eventually signals his drivers to follow him onto a small road leading to a farmhouse. The house, abandoned in the hurry of retreat, offers a temporary respite. Piani and Bonello manage to find some cheese, apples, and wine in the cellar, and they decide to have a quick breakfast. The two engineers accompanying Bonello are anxious to move on, wary of the time being wasted. After eating, Henry, Piani, Bonello, Aimo, the engineers, and the two sisters prepare to continue their journey off the main road. Henry observes the farmhouse one last time before they set off down the narrow, muddy path, not knowing what lies ahead, but understanding the urgency of their mission to reach Udine. At noon, our narrator, Lieutenant Henry, and his companions find themselves trapped on a muddy road about 10 kilometers from Udine, following their retreat from the Italian front during World War I. The rain has ceased, allowing the sun to peek through the clouds intermittently. Throughout the morning, they hear the ominous drone of enemy planes, which pass overhead and drop bombs in the distance, targeting the main high road. Our weary group has navigated a maze of secondary roads and reached dead ends, but with persistence, they've inched ever closer to their destination. The stuck car. Their progress grinds to a halt when Amo's car gets stuck while backing out of a dead-end road, its wheels digging into the soft earth until the vehicle is immobilized, resting on its differential. The group realizes their task. They must dig out in front of the wheels, place brush for traction, and then push the car back onto the road. Everyone descends to the road to assist, but two sergeants survey the situation and decide to desert without a word. Confrontation and desertion. Henry confronts the deserting sergeants, ordering them to cut brush to aid in the car's extrication. The sergeants refuse, insisting they must move on to avoid being cut off. When Henry asserts his authority, they ignore him and continue walking away. Henry commands them to halt, but they quicken their pace. Frustrated and desperate, Henry draws his pistol, aiming at the more vocal sergeant, and fires. He misses, prompting both sergeants to run. Henry shoots again, hitting one sergeant, while the other escapes through the hedge. Bonello, another driver, offers to finish off the wounded sergeant. Henry watches as Bonello cocks the pistol and fires twice, killing the man, then moves the body to the side of the road. Back to the task. Returning to the task at hand, the group rapidly cuts brush and digs out the mud from the front of the wheels, ready for another attempt to dislodge the car. Amo revs the engine, but despite their combined efforts, the car remains stuck. In a last-ditch effort, they use a rope to pull the car with the other vehicles, but the angle is wrong, and the wheels only dig deeper ruts. Abandoning the car. The group decides to abandon Amo's car after realizing it is hopelessly mired. They remove what they can carry, including food and drink. Bonello, still affected by the shooting, rummages through the dead sergeant's coat before Henry suggests discarding it. They contemplate what to do with two Italian girls who had been riding with them. The girls are directed to a safer road with some money, and they depart, holding the notes tightly. On foot to Udine. The drivers and Henry, leaving the stuck cars behind, begin their trek on foot toward Udine. They joke about wishing for bicycles and discuss the possibility of encountering enemy cavalry. The conversation turns to the shooting, with Bonello expressing a grim satisfaction at having killed the sergeant. They laugh and talk about their anarchist and socialist beliefs, and the two drivers from Imola invite Henry to visit their town after the war. As the road begins to ascend a hill, the group falls silent, walking briskly, unified by their urgent need to escape the encroaching enemy forces. Ahead, the road veers left, and an apple orchard lies beyond a stone wall. They continue their march, driven by the hope of reaching safety before it's too late. This chapter reveals the harrowing decisions and moral compromises made under the strain of war, as well as the camaraderie and ideological bonds between men facing the same dire circumstances. The journey continues, with each step taking them further from the battlefield, but closer to an uncertain future. Welcome, dear listeners, to Chapter 30 of A Farewell to Arms. In this gripping segment of our tale, we join our protagonist and his companions as they navigate a perilous landscape marked by wars, chaos, and destruction. The chapter opens with our characters on a sodden path leading to a river, where they encounter the remnants of a destroyed bridge. Amidst the desolation, they press on, seeking a way to cross. Their attention turns to a nearby railway bridge, which they hope remains intact. As they approach the bridge, the group debates the risk of crossing, pondering whether it might be rigged with explosives. Despite the potential danger, they decide to proceed, with our protagonist taking the lead. While he crosses, he observes a German staff car traversing another bridge, signaling the enemy's presence in the area. Once across, the group huddles behind an embankment, alarmed by their proximity to German forces. Their dread intensifies when they spot a column of German bicycle troops, a tangible reminder of the enemy's encroachment. The narrative then shifts to an urgent discussion about their next move. The protagonist suggests seeking shelter until nightfall, hoping the cover of darkness will aid their escape. However, their plans are disrupted when they come under fire from an unknown assailant, resulting in the tragic death of Amo, one of the group. Shaken, the group debates their options. One member, Bonello, chooses to leave, preferring capture to the uncertainty of their situation. The remaining two, the protagonist and Piani, decide to find refuge in a nearby farmhouse. In the safety of the barn, they share a meal of sausage and wine, a brief respite from the turmoil outside. The protagonist reflects on the absurdity of the war and the randomness of death as they prepare to continue their journey under the cover of night. Their nocturnal trek proves less eventful than anticipated, as they manage to evade both German and Italian forces. They marvel at the vastness of the retreat, with the entire countryside in motion. Despite the perils, they find hope in the possibility that the war might be nearing its end. However, their optimism is short-lived. Upon reaching the Tagliamento River and attempting to cross a bridge crowded with retreating forces, the protagonist is apprehended by the battle police. Mistaking him for a German spy or a treacherous officer, they begin to question him alongside other officers separated from their troops. With grim precision, the battle police execute those they judge guilty, including a lieutenant colonel who boldly challenges their authority. As the protagonist witnesses this harsh justice, he realizes that he may soon face the same fate. In a desperate attempt to escape, he breaks free from his captors and dives into the river, avoiding gunfire. Clinging to a piece of timber, he is swept away by the strong current, disappearing into the night, the war-torn shore fading from view. This concludes Chapter 30 of A Farewell to Arms. The protagonist's fate hangs in the balance, leaving us to ponder the unpredictable nature of war and the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for listening, and we'll return with the next chapter of this harrowing journey through love and war. Chapter 31 of Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms thrusts us into the midst of a dramatic and tense escape. The chapter opens with our protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, adrift in a swift-moving river, holding on to a heavy timber to stay afloat. It's uncertain how much time has passed, but the current is strong, the water icy, and various debris from the flooded banks rushes by. He clings to the timber, his chin resting on wood, vigilant against the threat of cramps. As dawn approaches, Frederick observes the changing landscape along the riverbanks, contemplating whether to shed his boots and clothes to swim to safety. Despite the risks, he decides to keep them on, understanding the importance of being fully equipped once he reaches Mestre. He watches as the shore alternates between seeming within grasp and then slipping away, as the timber is caught in an eddy. Despite his efforts to swim and push the timber toward the bank, the current is unyielding, and he begins to fear drowning due to the weight of his boots. In a desperate struggle, Frederick thrashes and fights through the water, until finally the bank draws nearer. Exhausted but relieved, he clings to a willow branch, too weak to pull himself up, but confident he won't drown. When his strength returns, he crawls out, pushes through the willow bushes, and collapses on the bank in the dim light of half-daylight, with no one else in sight. He lies there, listening to the river and the rain, taking in the solitude of his escape. Once Frederick regains some strength, he begins to navigate along the riverbank. He takes stock of his location, suspecting he might be opposite the town of San Vito, and begins planning his next steps. He encounters a ditch and uses the opportunity to remove his soaked shoes, coat, and other clothes, wringing them out to lessen the discomfort of the cold, wet fabric against his skin. Noticing he has lost his cap, he cuts the stars of his lieutenant rank from his sleeves, stowing them with his wet money in his wallet. Dressed again, Frederick feels the clammy clothes against his body, but he slaps his arms to maintain circulation, knowing he must stay on the move to avoid catching cold. He sets off along the bank of a canal, now in full daylight, observing the bleak, flat landscape of the Venetian plain under the persistent rain. As he stumbles onto a road, a machine gun detachment passes by, paying him no mind. Throughout the day, he traverses the plain, crossing railways and roads, always moving southward. Eventually, he finds himself by a railway line running beside a marsh, where he spots soldiers guarding a flag station and a bridge. Concealing himself on the railway embankment, he waits for a train to come, hungry and strategizing how to board it undetected. When a train finally appears, Frederick times his movements carefully. He stands as the engine passes, trying to blend in with the surroundings. Then, as an open gondola car covered with canvas approaches, he leaps, catching the rear hand rods and pulling himself up. He crouches between the gondola and the next car, careful to avoid the gaze of a young guard at the bridge, who looks at him but is convinced by Frederick's contemptuous stare that he belongs there. Once past the bridge, Frederick ducks under the canvas, bumping his head and drawing blood, but continuing on to hide among what he discovers are guns, probably sent from the Third Army. He lies there, listening to the rain and the rhythmic clicking of the tracks, attending to his wound with rainwater to avoid appearing conspicuous. Knowing he must disembark before reaching Mestre to avoid being discovered amidst the guns, he reflects on his hunger. The chapter closing with Frederick concealed, on the move, and plotting his next move. Chapter 32 of A Farewell to Arms opens with our protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, lying on the floor of a flat car amid guns and wet canvas, reflecting on his physical discomfort and his hunger. He is cold, wet, and plagued by hunger pangs that feel as if his belly is turning over on itself. The chapter immerses us in Henry's introspection as he contemplates the parts of his body that feel like his own and those that do not, particularly focusing on his knee, which has been expertly treated by Dr. Valentini. Despite the successful surgery, Henry feels a detachment from his body, with only his head and the inside of his belly feeling truly his. Henry's thoughts drift to Catherine Barclay, his love interest, but he is cautious not to dwell on her too much, for fear of going crazy with uncertainty about their reunion. He allows himself only a fleeting memory of being with Catherine, recalling the intimate sensation of lying beside her, but he is careful to suppress further thoughts to avoid becoming overwhelmed by loneliness and longing. As he lies there, Henry reflects on his lack of affection for the inanimate objects around him, the floor of the flat car, the guns, the canvas. He acknowledges that while there is a certain pleasure to be found in these things, his love is reserved for Catherine, who is not there with him. This realization leads to a deeper contemplation of his current situation. He sees things very clearly and coldly, recognizing that his involvement in the war is over after witnessing the retreat of one army and the advance of another. Henry contemplates the loss of his men and vehicles during the retreat and uses an analogy comparing himself to a floorwalker who has lost the stock of his department in a fire. He recognizes that there is no insurance to cover such losses in war, and with a sense of resignation, he acknowledges that he has no further obligation to the army. He muses on the absurdity of being punished for something as constant as an accent, and extends this thought to his own predicament, considering his lack of desire to return to the military fold, even if it were an option. The chapter continues with Henry's contemplation of his anger being washed away in the Tagliamento River, along with any sense of duty he once felt. He speculates about the aftermath of his desertion, the carabinieri who arrested him, the likelihood that his papers won't be found on him, and the possible news that might reach the United States about his supposed death. Henry's thoughts then turn to his comrades, wondering about the fate of the priest and his friend Rinaldi, whom he now believes he will never see again. He muses about Rinaldi's health, hoping that his friend does not have syphilis, and empathizes with the worry such a diagnosis would bring, admitting that he would be concerned too. As the chapter moves towards its conclusion, Henry's focus shifts back to his immediate physical needs: eating, drinking, and sleeping, especially with Catherine. He fantasizes about being reunited with her, possibly the following night, enjoying a good meal, and being in a bed with sheets. He is determined that once they are together again, they will never part, except to escape together. With night approaching, Henry lies in the dark, his mind occupied with thoughts of where they might flee to, considering the various possibilities that lie ahead. Throughout the chapter, the narrative remains tightly bound to Henry's inner thoughts, giving us a glimpse into his emotional state and his process of disentangling himself from the war and reorienting his life towards a future with Catherine. The sense of isolation and the transition from soldier to deserter are palpable, as Henry resolves to leave his military life behind and focus on his personal desires and the hope of a peaceful life with the woman he loves. In the pre-dawn darkness of Milan, the protagonist of our story, Frederick Henry, alights from a slowing train, stepping into an unfamiliar cityscape. As he crosses the tracks and navigates through buildings onto the street, he finds himself drawn to the inviting glow of an open wine shop. Inside, the scent of morning, swept dust, spoons clinking against coffee glasses, and the ghostly rings of wine glasses permeates the air. At the bar, Henry engages in a brief conversation with the proprietor, who offers him a glass of coffee and a piece of bread. Observing two soldiers who appear inebriated, the proprietor probes for news from the front, but Henry maintains a vague distance, asserting his ignorance. Sensing potential trouble around Henry, the proprietor kindly offers him sanctuary in the building, should he need it, hinting at the dangers that may be lurking for someone in Henry's position. The proprietor also offers him false leave papers in case Henry requires them, but he declines, reassuring the man that he is not in any trouble. Leaving the wine shop with a new friend's address in mind, Henry hails a cab and directs it to the hospital where he was previously treated. At the hospital, the porter and his wife greet him warmly, but their joy quickly turns bittersweet when he inquires about Miss Barclay, the English nurse he is fond of. They inform him that she has left for Stresa 2 days prior. Henry charges the porter with secrecy regarding his visit and dismisses the man's refusal of a monetary token of thanks. His next destination is the home of Simmons, a fellow American whom he knows is studying singing in Milan. Upon arrival, he finds Simmons in a state of slumber, but the man rouses to engage in conversation, albeit groggily. Henry reveals he's in a bind and seeks advice on entering Switzerland. Simmons outlines the straightforwardness of the process, suggesting that Henry might simply have to report to Swiss authorities once he crosses the border. Simmons expresses readiness to assist Henry in any way he can, offering him a selection of his own clothes to replace Henry's military attire that might attract unwanted attention. While Henry initially insists on purchasing new clothes, he ultimately accepts Simmons's generous offer. The discussion turns to passports and the ease with which one can cross into Switzerland from Stresa. Simmons jests about joining Henry, but remains committed to his singing, demonstrating his vocal prowess with an impromptu performance. Henry decides to let his cab go, likely contemplating his next steps and the journey to Stresa, where he hopes to reunite with Miss Barclay. He and Simmons agree to reconvene for breakfast, marking the end of this chapter with a sense of camaraderie and the looming uncertainty of Henry's fate. Chapter 34 of A Farewell to Arms opens with the protagonist, Frederick Henry, feeling out of place in his civilian clothes after a long time spent in military uniform. He is on a train to Stresa, leaving behind the war and the army, having made what he describes as a separate peace. He is uncomfortable and lonely, and he doesn't want to read about the war in the newspaper. Once he arrives in Stresa, he finds the station deserted, a stark reminder that the tourist season is over. He asks a station attendant about which hotels are open and learns that the Grand Hotel and des Isles Borromée and some smaller hotels are still operating. As he walks to the Grand Hotel in the rain, he decides to take a carriage to make a better impression upon arrival. At the hotel, Frederick rents a luxurious room overlooking the lake and tells the staff he is expecting his wife. The room has a large double bed, and the hotel itself exudes opulence. He visits the hotel bar, where he is recognized by the bartender. They have a conversation about fishing and tobacco, as well as 2 English nurses that Frederick is looking for, one of them being Catherine Barclay, whom he refers to as his wife. The bartender informs Frederick that the nurses are staying at a smaller hotel near the train station. After enjoying some martinis and sandwiches, Frederick reflects on his detachment from the war, feeling like a schoolboy who has played truant. Frederick finds Catherine and her friend Helen Ferguson having supper at their hotel. Catherine is overjoyed to see him, but Ferguson is highly critical of their relationship. She accuses Frederick of ruining Catherine with his Italian sneakiness and expresses shame over Catherine's pregnancy. Despite Ferguson's outburst, Catherine remains affectionate and tries to comfort her friend. After an emotionally charged dinner, which is interrupted by Ferguson's outbursts and tears, Frederick and Catherine decide to leave the hotel and go to the Grand Hotel. There, they spend a night feeling safe and at home together. Frederick muses on the idea of courage in the world and how it breaks or kills those who possess it. The next morning, Catherine and Frederick enjoy breakfast in bed, basking in the sunlight and each other's company. They discuss the possibility of Frederick being arrested for desertion, but Catherine is determined to protect him and suggests they flee to Switzerland. As the weather turns cloudy, Frederick expresses a wish for a life without having to live like criminals. Catherine reassures him, emphasizing that they will have a fine time together and are not truly living as criminals since it's only the Italian army he has deserted from. The chapter ends with the couple returning to bed, feeling safe and content in each other's presence. Catherine reassures Frederick that she will take care of him, and they agree not to think about their troubles for the time being. Chapter 35 of A Farewell to Arms opens with the protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, waiting in the hotel bar while Catherine Barclay visits Miss Ferguson. The bar is cozy, furnished with comfortable leather chairs, and Henry occupies himself by reading the newspapers. The Italian army's retreat to the Piave River is reported, prompting him to reminisce about the landscape he saw there before the war. The barman enters and informs Henry that Count Greffy, a 94-year-old man with a distinguished history in diplomacy, is staying at the hotel and wishes to play billiards with him. Henry remembers Count Greffy's excellent manners and billiard skills from their previous encounter in Stresa. The barman mentions Count Greffy's vitality, citing his consumption of 3 champagne cocktails before dinner the previous night. Instead of meeting the Count immediately, Henry decides to go fishing with the barman. They take a boat out onto the lake, trolling for trout with a spinner and heavy sinker. Despite the serene environment and the barman's skillful handling of the line, they fail to catch any fish. After a while, they stop at a fisherman's island for a drink, discussing the war and the barman's reluctance to join the military should he be called up next year. Upon returning to the hotel, Henry declines another drink and goes up to his room, finding Catherine has not yet returned from her visit with Ferguson. He lies on the bed, trying to resist his thoughts until Catherine's arrival makes everything feel right again. She informs him that Ferguson will join them for lunch, and although Henry feels a bit overwhelmed by his reliance on Catherine for happiness, he agrees to be cordial. Lunch is a pleasant affair, with Catherine and Ferguson impressed by the hotel's grandeur. Count Greffy and his niece make an appearance, and the Count's presence enhances the social atmosphere. After lunch, Ferguson departs to rest, and Henry receives a message from Count Greffy inviting him to play billiards. Henry reluctantly leaves Catherine to honor the invitation, feeling out of place in his civilian attire. He finds Count Greffy practicing in the billiard room, where they engage in a friendly match that Count Greffy wins. The Count then opens a bottle of champagne and they sit to drink together, discussing life, wisdom, and war. Count Greffy reveals his lack of religious conviction despite his age, expressing surprise that he has not grown more devout. Henry promises to pray for Count Greffy if he becomes devout, and the Count considers the possibility that he has outlived his religious feeling. They conclude their conversation with Count Greffy, acknowledging the religious nature of being in love. The scene ends with the two men walking upstairs, having shared a moment of camaraderie and introspection, bridging the gap between youth and old age. Chapter 36 of A Farewell to Arms begins with the protagonist, Frederick Henry, being roused from sleep by a storm outside. The rain lashes the window panes and water is seeping into the room. Amidst this disturbance, there's a knock on the door. Frederick, careful not to wake Catherine, his companion, moves to answer it. He finds the barman, Emilio, standing in the doorway, his overcoat soaked and his hat dripping wet. Emilio urgently requests to speak with Frederick, indicating that the matter is of grave importance. Frederick ushers him into the bathroom to talk privately, locking the door behind them. Emilio reveals that the authorities plan to arrest Frederick in the morning, having become suspicious of his presence in the area as a former officer now out of uniform, especially during the aftermath of the military retreat. Frederick ponders the situation briefly, questioning Emilio on the best course of action. Emilio suggests fleeing to Switzerland immediately in his own boat, despite the rough weather. Although the storm is abating, time is of the essence as the arrest could happen early. Emilio offers to handle the packing and transportation of their luggage, instructing them to meet him at the boat. Frederick returns to the bedroom to share the news with Catherine, who is already awake. He informs her of the imminent danger and the need to depart for Switzerland by boat. Catherine, though initially groggy and confused, quickly grasps the urgency and begins dressing. She is modest about her changing body due to her pregnancy and asks Frederick to look away while she changes. With minimal belongings to pack, the couple prepares to leave. Catherine, still puzzled by the barman's presence in the bathroom, learns that he's assisting them with their escape. Frederick reminisces about a time when he almost sent Emilio some pipe tobacco, highlighting their past connection. The weather outside is still poor, but the wind has shifted, indicating the passing storm. Catherine and Frederick gather their things, and Emilio takes their bags, planning to exit discreetly through the servants' stairs to avoid suspicion. He advises them to walk out as if they're simply going for a walk in the storm. As they leave the hotel, the porter, surprised to see them venturing out into the bad weather, insists on lending them an umbrella. Frederick tips him generously, and they step out into the rainy night, promising to return soon. The porter, whose English is quite literal, expresses his concern for their well-being in the storm. Under the cover of the large umbrella, the couple walks through the hotel's gardens, across the road, and along the lakeside pathway. The wind is cold and signals snow in the mountains. They find Emilio waiting by the water, where he has already stowed their bags in the boat. Emilio refuses payment for the boat up front, instead suggesting Frederick send him money later if they make it safely to Switzerland. He hands Frederick sandwiches, brandy, and wine for the journey, accepting a small payment for these provisions. Catherine boards the boat, and Emilio advises them on the route to take, considering the weather and landmarks along the lake. The time is just past 11 o'clock at night, and Emilio estimates it will take until 7 in the morning to reach their destination if they row continuously. He instructs them to use the wind to navigate and provides a bailing can for the journey. After ensuring that they left money for the hotel bill, Emilio bids them good luck, though he half-jokingly remarks that they won't be grateful if they end up drowned. Frederick and Catherine express their thanks, and Emilio pushes the boat off into the water. Frederick takes up the oars, and as they move away from the lights of the hotel and into the darkness, he waves back to the barman. With the wind at their backs, they begin their precarious journey across the lake, hoping to reach the safety of Switzerland. In Chapter 37 of Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms, our protagonist and Catherine have escaped Italy by rowboat, seeking refuge in neutral Switzerland during World War I. The chapter unfolds through a series of detailed scenes that capture their tense, exhausting, and eventually successful journey across Lac Maggiore. The chapter opens in the dark of night, with the protagonist rowing the boat through rough waters, keeping the wind in his face. He rows diligently, navigating the darkness with only the occasional light from the moon to guide him. Catherine, in the stern, remains mostly unseen in the dark, and he worries about blisters forming on his hands from the oars. As they progress, they miss their intended landmark of Palanza, instead passing it unseen and finding themselves further up the lake near Intra. They row steadily, missing the water with the oars at times due to the waves, and have a close call with a rocky point before continuing onward. Catherine and the protagonist share a brief conversation about their departure, expressing concern about Ferguson, who will wake to find them gone, and the urgency of reaching the Swiss part of the lake before daylight exposes them to customs guards. The protagonist continues to row throughout the night, despite his hands becoming sore and the danger of crashing into the shore. At one point, they attempt to sail the boat using an umbrella, but the wind is too strong and it buckles, leaving the protagonist to resume rowing. Catherine offers to take over, and they share a moment of levity when she laughs at the comically failed attempt at sailing with the umbrella. As daylight approaches, They realize they are close to the shore and lay low to avoid detection by a motorboat carrying Italian finance guards. After the boat passes, they continue rowing, with Catherine taking a turn at the oars. The couple shares sandwiches and brandy, trying to maintain their spirits despite the fatigue and uncertainty of their situation. Eventually, the dawn's light reveals they are close to a village, and a Swiss soldier spots them. They wave, and after a moment of relief in realizing they are likely in Switzerland, they make their way to the quay, tie up the boat, and step onto Swiss soil. They revel in the feeling of safety and celebrate by going into a cafe for breakfast. After their meal, their sense of security is briefly shaken when they are arrested and taken to a customs house. The protagonist invents a story about being a sportsman who loves rowing and is in Switzerland for winter sports. The lieutenant is skeptical, but intrigued by their passports and the money they possess. After a thorough check, the couple is allowed to travel to Locarno with a soldier escort, where they must report to the police and possibly face further questioning. In Locarno, officials interrogate them, and despite not believing their story, they grant them provisional visas due to their citizenship and funds. The couple humorously debates with the officials about the best place for winter sports before deciding to go to Montreux. The chapter concludes with the couple leaving the police station, relieved and excited to start their new life in Switzerland, away from the war. They take a carriage to a hotel, reflecting on their journey and looking forward to a well-deserved rest. Despite the protagonist's exhaustion and raw blisters, they are grateful to be safe and together. This concludes Chapter 37 of A Farewell to Arms, a pivotal moment where the protagonist and Catherine escape Italy and find refuge in Switzerland, away from the perils of war. Chapter 38 of A Farewell to Arms begins with the narrator, Frederick Henry, describing the late arrival of snowfall as he and Catherine live in a brown wooden house in the pine trees on the side of a mountain. In the cold mornings, Mrs. Göttingen would come to close the windows and start a fire in the porcelain stove, eventually bringing breakfast to the couple who could see the lake and snow-capped mountains from their bed. Outside, a road winds up the mountain, hard with frost, inviting for walks either on the path through the pine forest or the invigorating climb up the road with nailed boots. From the porch, they watch the steep descent to the plain, the terraced vineyards, and the far-off Dent du Midi mountain that does not cast a shadow due to its distance. On sunny days, they eat lunch on the porch, but otherwise in their small, plain, wooden-walled room with a big stove, playing two-handed card games. Downstairs, Mr. and Mrs. Göttingen live happily, having saved money to buy the place. Frederick and Catherine hear their laughter and occasionally the sound of visitors in the parlor where the Göttingens sell wine and beer. Frederick keeps the fire stocked from the woodbox in the hall, and they go to bed early, enjoying the cold, clear air from the open windows. Frederick reflects on how distant the war feels and how the fighting continues in the mountains. The couple occasionally walks down the mountain to Montreux, passing through villages and an old stone chateau, reaching the town where they walk along the lake, observe birds, and visit shops. Catherine gets her hair done by a cheerful woman, while Frederick drinks beer and reads newspapers filled with bad news. Reunited, they decide to have beer instead of tea, joking about keeping their unborn child small. They discuss marriage, with Catherine expressing her desire to wait until after the birth to avoid the embarrassment of being visibly pregnant during the ceremony. Frederick learns Catherine plans to become an American, and they daydream about visiting places like Niagara Falls and the Golden Gate in San Francisco. After a cold walk, they take the electric train back up the mountain. At home, they discuss their contentment and the idea of Frederick growing a beard as a project. Catherine expresses concern that she might be a bore to Frederick due to her pregnancy, but he reassures her of his love and their mutual happiness. They playfully discuss their physical appearances and their deep connection, declaring their desire to be indistinguishably intertwined. The chapter closes with a heavy snowstorm beginning 3 days before Christmas. They watch the snow from bed, venture out briefly, and then return for lunch. Mr. Göttingen mentions his son will teach Frederick to ski. Later, as they play chess and plan for their future, the couple reaffirms their love and the joy they share in each other's company. At night, they converse briefly before falling asleep, with Frederick watching Catherine in the moonlight and reflecting on their happiness before joining her in sleep. Voiceover script, Chapter 39, Summary of Farewell to Arms. We begin in the heart of winter, with our narrator sporting a new beard as a companion to the frosty landscape. The snow has transformed the world into a white wonderland, hardening the roads and blanketing the terrain from the mountains to Montreux and even across the Rhone Valley. The cold is piercing, yet it brings a sense of tranquility as life slows to match the season's pace. Our narrator, presumably Henry, ventures with Catherine on long walks, making their way through this serene, icy domain. Catherine is well prepared for their treks, donned in hobnailed boots, a cape, and armed with a steel-tipped stick. Despite her attire, she doesn't appear large, and they take their time, resting when needed. Their destination often includes the Bains de l'Alliaz, where an inn nestled among the trees offers respite for travelers and woodcutters alike. Inside, the couple warms themselves by the stove, sipping glühwein, a spiced hot red wine, the perfect antidote to the biting cold. Upon leaving the cozy inn, they are greeted by the sharp air, which provides a stark contrast to the smoky warmth they've just left behind. Outside, they see woodcutters' horses, their breath visible in the cold, their bodies trying to stay warm. As they make their way home, the road presents varying conditions from slick ice to smooth snow-packed paths. The evenings offer glimpses of foxes, adding to the enchantment of their surroundings. The countryside delights them, and their interactions are playful and loving. Catherine compliments Henry's beard, likening it to those of the woodcutters, and they share a light-hearted exchange about the adornment of a chamois hunter they've seen. Their conversation turns whimsical as they imagine having fox-like tails, pondering the practicality and the freedom such an appendage would offer. They revel in the isolation their current life provides, cherishing the privacy and the absence of outside interference. Catherine, feeling a little tired, suggests they rest, and as they sit close together, they touch upon the future and their unborn child, ensuring that nothing will come between them. Money matters are briefly discussed. They are comfortable for now, with their finances secure. Family ties are also a topic, with Henry admitting he hasn't communicated with his relatives beyond financial necessities. Catherine expresses curiosity about them, but Henry prefers to keep the focus on their immediate world, promising to send a cable to avoid worrying about family dynamics. As they continue their walk, the night grows darker, and the snow underfoot squeaks with each step, a testament to the dry, cold night. Catherine professes her love for Henry's beard, finding it both fierce in appearance and soft to the touch. She shares her plans for a post-pregnancy transformation, envisioning a haircut that will make her a fine, new, and different girl for Henry. He responds with affection, reassuring her of his unwavering love and playing along with her desire to ruin him, which he admits is a mutual aspiration. End of voiceover script. Chapter 40 of A Farewell to Arms opens with the narrator, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, and his pregnant partner, Catherine Barclay, living contentedly through the winter months in the mountains. The winter weather has been kind, but as March arrives, so does a persistent rain that melts the snow and turns the mountainside into slush. Frederick and Catherine ponder the idea of relocating to town before the birth of their child, which is about a month away. They consider Montreux first, but soon decide on Lausanne, where the hospital is located, as it offers the convenience of a bigger town while still allowing them privacy. After 3 days of continuous rain, they resolve to leave their mountain residence. The landlord, Mr. Guttingen, is understanding and hopes they will return in the spring with their baby. They pack their things and, with Mr. and Mrs. Guttingen's help, depart for Lausanne by train after a warm farewell. The landscape outside is unrecognizable due to the rain and clouds, and the usual beauty of the mountains is obscured. Upon arrival in Lausanne, they check into a medium-sized hotel, which seems luxurious compared to their previous accommodations. The room looks out onto a rainy garden, and Catherine busies herself with unpacking while Frederick lies on the bed, sipping whiskey and soda and reading about the German offensive of March 1918. Catherine playfully reminds Frederick that they need to buy baby clothes, and they share a light-hearted moment despite their awareness of the impending responsibilities. They enjoy the intimacy of their hotel room, deciding to stay in for the evening. Frederick orders dinner and their favorite white Capri wine, thinking about how whiskey is one of life's pleasant aspects. They spend 3 weeks at the hotel, mostly dining alone or in their room. With the arrival of warmer weather, they wish they were back in the mountains, but the cold soon returns. Catherine shops for baby items while Frederick visits a gymnasium to stay fit, enjoying the early signs of spring in the town and the routine of meeting Catherine for lunch after his workouts. The couple occasionally goes for carriage rides, reveling in the serene countryside. As Catherine's pregnancy advances, Frederick cherishes these moments, knowing that the birth of their child is drawing near and that their time together is precious. The chapter closes with an awareness of the urgency brought about by the impending arrival of their baby, intensifying their desire to make the most of each moment they have together. Chapter 41 of A Farewell to Arms begins in the early hours of the morning, when Catherine Barclay awakens with pains that suggest she may be going into labor. Frederick Henry, the narrator, calls the doctor, who instructs them to go to the hospital. After some difficulties, they manage to secure a taxi and make their way to the hospital. Upon arrival, they are greeted by administrative procedures and then shown to Catherine's room. She is nervous, but excited that the birth is imminent. Frederick waits outside while Catherine is prepared by the nurse, and then he is allowed to rejoin her. The labor pains are coming regularly, and Catherine is given gas to help manage the pain. Frederick is sent out to get breakfast, signifying the long process that lies ahead. The labor continues through the morning and into the afternoon, but the baby is not progressing as it should. The medical staff discuss options with Frederick, and they agree that a cesarean section is the best course of action. In the meantime, Frederick finds himself unable to do anything but wait and worry, reflecting on the cruelty of nature and the inevitability of death. The baby, a boy, is delivered via cesarean, but he is stillborn, something Frederick is not immediately aware of. He sees the medical staff attending to the baby, but they are unable to revive him. After the surgery, Catherine is exhausted and in pain. As they converse, it becomes evident to Frederick that she is in a critical condition. The doctor informs Frederick that Catherine has suffered a series of hemorrhages, and despite their efforts, they are unable to save her. Catherine remains brave and composed, expressing her love for Frederick and her lack of fear despite knowing she will not survive. Catherine falls into unconsciousness and dies shortly thereafter. Frederick is left to grapple with the devastating loss of both his child and his beloved. In the end, he walks back to his hotel alone in the rain, a poignant conclusion to a story marked by love and tragedy. Throughout this chapter, the emotional journey of waiting, hope, helplessness, and the eventual confrontation with mortality is depicted with stark realism, leaving readers with a profound sense of loss and the futility of war, which parallels the personal tragedy within the quiet walls of the hospital.